Time and time again, we're met with the many strange and often scary mysteries that have haunted our past for ages. Some of them are often not as famous or well known, and these are the ones worth hearing about. 1947 became widely known as the year of the flying saucer, after the first what is assumed to be a UFO of alien origin was documented. It was the 24th of June in 1947, when a pilot named Kenneth A. Arnold had seen some sort of mysterious, unidentified event take place right before his eyes during one of his flights. Kenneth was known to be a well-experienced pilot with over 9,000 hours of flying. He was also a member of the Search and Rescue of Idaho. Upon this event, he'd been flying a single-engine Call Air A-2 light plane. This encounter is said to have added the words flying saucer to the vocabulary. It was that afternoon when Kenneth had departed from Washington to an air show situated in Oregon. He was also supposed to stop for fuel at Yakima, Washington on the route. On this day, it appeared that the winds were light and the skies were clear. Kenneth had decided to take a small detour in hopes of finding Marines who were aboard the AUS Marine Corps Curtiss C-46 Commando, which had crash-landed somewhere on Mount Rainier. For this, he would have claimed a $5,000 reward. It was just short of 3 p.m. when Kenneth was circling his aircraft about 20 miles west of Mount Rainier, when he saw a sudden flash of bright light from a northeast direction. Kenneth initially believed it was another pilot flying a shiny P-51, and the sun was just reflecting off the aircraft. More flashes of light ruled out the idea of a DC-4 aircraft as the suspect, which he spotted earlier traveling behind him. According to Kenneth, the source of the flashes was generated from 9 reflective unidentified objects, which were flying in an organized form at 5 miles in length. Each individual aircraft was 100 feet across and circular in shape, although one of them appeared to be a crescent form. They also exhibited no tail and would periodically flip or weave. The movement was described as one you would expect from a Chinese kite. Kenneth timed the journey it took these strange objects to get from Mount Rainier to Mount Adams. It was determined that they were flying between 1,200 and 1,700 miles per hour, at least twice the speed of any other known aircraft at the time. Kenneth had been flying about 9,200 feet when the event occurred. The objects had flown off toward Mount Adams, and he managed to see their black contrast against the snowy mountains. He recalls not feeling startled or alarmed by the objects, and assumed that some sort of military testing was taking place. But if this was the case, no one from the military confirmed it. Kenneth described the bright light as sunlight reflecting off of a mirror. He also believed at first that the bright lights were reflection on his windscreen, and tested this by moving his plane from side to side. Kenneth landed safely in Yakima around 4 p.m., where he quickly informed an acquaintance of his about what he had encountered. His story spread throughout the world, and he told fellow military pilots of this event. Strangely, these pilots reported seeing similar objects when in flight. Kenneth Arnold underwent many interviews and was seen as a credible source. He later suspected that what he had seen was not of human origin, but rather the works of extraterrestrial beings. Days after the initial report, reporters and other media personnel began using the term flying saucer. Kenneth denied using that term to describe the objects, but in an article in The Atlantic, Megan Garber explained that he was using the words saucer, pie pan, and disc to describe the aircrafts. Nolan Skiff of the East Oregonian newspaper used the term saucer-like craft in his article. There were some who came forward as witnesses stating that they'd seen similar, if not the same, reflective objects around the mountains. After a military investigation of the claims was set into motion, even more witnesses came forward with claims of also seeing the unidentified objects. They reported seeing quick-moving crafts and bright lights, but according to the pilot flying the Douglas DC-4, he had not seen anything out of the ordinary, especially not alien spaceships. It was identified that a total of 16 witnesses had seen the objects in the skies of Seattle that very same day. On the 4th of July, 10 days after the incident, those aboard the United Airlines flight had spotted 9 circular objects which were flying next to the airplane for almost 15 minutes before vanishing entirely. Kenneth and Captain Smith of the United Airlines became acquainted and shared the information on what they had witnessed. More sightings were reported, one of which was photographed above Tulsa, Oklahoma on the 12th of July in 1947. The person responsible for this image believed it to be something related to the military. After Kenneth's UFO encounter, many more started to come up throughout that year. Also on July 4th, Frank Ryman spotted a UFO which could be seen from his front garden in Lake City, Washington. A few days later, a photograph was captured of another unidentified object in Phoenix, Arizona, by William Rhodes on the 7th of July, 1947. Also in July of 1947, a series of sightings sparked in an Army airfield in California. About 5 different reports surfaced here of flying saucers taking to the air. Cincinnati, Ohio had its fair share of alien encounters. A newspaper article was released titled "Flying Saucers Over Cincinnati." A crashed flying disc was discovered in 1947 by the Roswell Army Airfield. Morristown, New Jersey photographed some flying discs of their own on the 10th of July, 1947. After Kenneth Arnold's initial report, many more sightings of similarly shaped objects were spotted across America, some of which were in close proximity to where Kenneth's encounter occurred, leading one to believe that such an event was not a fabrication or a military test of unknown aircraft, but may in fact be that of the visitation of extraterrestrials, making their quick and elusive appearances as well as blinding human pilots with their reflective lights. In 1948, the U.S. Air Force had begun an investigation known as Project Sign. Those involved in the project believed that what Kenneth and others had seen were sophisticated aircraft. Other researchers claimed that these UFOs may indeed be alien spacecraft. This was called the extraterrestrial hypothesis, or ETH. Almost a year later, the project was overtaken by Project Grudge, and in 1952, this was also changed to Project Blue Book, which holds the record of the longest-lived official UFO reports. The project found itself at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. From its initial inception up until 1969, Project Blue Book stacked up 12,000 UFO sightings and activity. Each of the reports fell under one of the following categories: identified, which relates to astronomical or human-caused events, or unidentified, which is self-explanatory but often due to a lack of information on the event which occurred. In 1952, the spark in UFO sightings was blamed on the temperature inversions. This excuse was not convincing anyone, and reports continued to climb. This led to the Central Intelligence Agency encouraging the government to put in some effort from scientific fields. This area was led by H.P. Robertson, a Pasadena physicist. He and his team concluded that the sightings were of no threat, and also decided that they did not harbor any evidence of ETH. It'll forever remain a mystery as to what exactly Kenneth witnessed that day, as well as all of the sightings that came after that. Although nowadays no one bats an eye over some supposed extraterrestrial activity, it would certainly still be rather creepy to know that such sightings have been reported for so long, and the evidence of aliens is too overwhelming to ignore. Some of the most well-kept secrets of the world come from the depths and peaks of the Himalayas. One such great mystery is that of the immortal land. Immortality has been a long-discussed concept for many years, and these inhabitants may hold the key to it. But no one has been able to find that supposed land of the immortals, leading to one of the greatest and strangest mysteries of all time. It's said that the land of immortals holds the inhabitants of superhuman beings, and the land is known as Gyan. The land is found in the isolated valleys of the Himalayas, and houses immortal masters harboring supernatural abilities. This enigmatic land is believed to be situated in the northern region of Tibet. Although there's a lot of confusion surrounding the location, some ancient texts are said to lead one to the location and instructions to reach the land. According to those who believe in the mysterious dwelling, they state that these instructions are rather cryptic. Although these claims have not been confirmed, there are some believers who state that they visited the land of immortals. Saikaka was one such person. He claims to have made various trips to this hidden land, and was taken there by a spiritual leader for immortal teachings and other spiritual instruction. He states that it exists on a different plane than ours, or possibly a higher dimension, but has parallel locations in actual places on Earth. Another author also made such claims in his writing, the autobiography of a yogi. He speaks of one of the immortals, who's of great age yet remains looking young and full of life. The writer furthers this by stating that the house of Babaji pulsates with the life of spiritual masters. His house is situated within Gyan. Another piece of writing detailed different aspects of this place, including the immortal inhabitants. He also speaks of the account that his spiritual leader had when visiting the land to learn solar science. They gave the guru the knowledge to change one item into another by manipulating the sun's rays. This legend can be traced back to Tibet, where this strange land was known as the source of happiness. Some believe that this place is a myth, while others, having supposedly been there, confirm that the land is in fact there. Several ancient texts speak about this area, and it's thought that it's camouflaged specifically to deter the eyes of outsiders from learning secrets that they should not, such as immortality. Some suggest that the land is situated in an inaccessible area of the Himalayas, which only some visitors have accidentally stumbled upon, or are so knowledgeable that they were able to decipher the cryptic directions. It's suggested that this land holds a lot of spiritual importance, and is a sacred place of divine knowledge, which is passed down through the years. Many spiritually enlightened people seek out this place in hopes of gaining wisdom or further enlightenment. It seems that only the most skilled yogis and saints are able to reach Gyan. Of course, these individuals would have to harbor no bad karma and can only gain access to the land if they have a karmic connection with it. It's also widely believed that the immortal inhabitants of this place have a strong influence over humankind in various secretive ways. Mysteriously, a member of the British Army, L.P. Farrell, also visited the Eternal Land. He was especially interested in Hindu culture, which led some to believe that this is why he was allowed to see the land. Farrell claimed that the journey there is rather dangerous and is a laborious act. He stated that he saw someone guiding him to the land. After 3.5 hours of climbing, he took a rest, but was requested to take off his shoes by the entity. He knew Farrell's name as well. Sadhu has explained to Farrell that one could not simply reach this place, and what he had seen and heard has never been accessed by any regular human being. Sadhu told him that he was called there for a specific and important reason, perhaps to bear an updated set of knowledge. As later mentioned, it can be speculated that these beings accessed the knowledge or obtained one of the books created by the 9 Unknown Men, a secret society with extensive knowledge of worldly things. Or perhaps these inhabitants are part of the secret organization and have achieved a high level of camouflage or invisibility to the public. Perhaps this theory is why only a select few are able to reach this place, and have to be pure of heart. This mysterious land is said to not go through the cycle of rebirth and passing on, and the belief states that some are convinced that the land is home to some ancient knowledge that the unknown men seem to hold as well. The Shambhala concept depicts the land of Gyan to resemble the look of a lotus with 8 petals. In the center of this place, there's a tree of life. The immortals are believed to transfer knowledge to other people, probably selectively chosen in an attempt to work toward a better future for the destiny of the human race. The Dalai Lama explains that although this place is of earthly origin, one can only access it by obligation, further supporting the idea of a secret society that passes on information to a chosen person if they can no longer participate. These immortal beings are said to lead the world in meditation and peace. The eternal beings which inhabit this mysterious place are known as sadhus. The land of Gyan also camouflages itself by will to keep its contents hidden from the natural world. The reason being quite obvious. What would we do if people came out to find the source of immortality? Qamar Ali Darvesh, a Muslim saint, has a shrine dedicated to him in India, a village about 180 kilometers from Mumbai. Many tourists flock to the shrine on a yearly basis to witness a mysterious event that takes place at the shrine. Qamar Ali was born into a middle-class family and was the youngest of his siblings. His brothers were all well known for their muscular power, but Qamar Ali was of a peace-loving nature. He was said to be compassionate and was often teased by others in the community for not taking to the path of expressing his brute strength. Soon, he found himself on the path to becoming a disciple of a saint. Shortly after, he began preaching of immortality and had passed away in his late teens. Before he left, he requested that a heavy stone be left near his tomb, which was made of white marble. With this, he also cursed the boulder, which was the one that the village men used in training. He did this to prove that spirituality overpowers physicality. He was also quoted saying, quote, "If 11 men place their right index fingers under the stone and jointly call my name, I'll cause it to rise higher than their heads. Otherwise, neither by themselves nor together will they be able to move it more than 2 feet off the ground." Qamar Ali found himself greatly honored by the villagers, and still people worship him. The boulder that was placed at his shrine was nicknamed the levitating or lifting stone. The mystery of this stone comes in handy when exactly 11 men place the tips of their index finger under the boulder and repeat the name of Qamar Ali Darvesh. That's when the object begins to levitate. It rises about 2 feet above the heads of the men. It will remain as such if the number of men remains the same, and if the position is not altered or the use of a different finger. Many onlookers have bore witness to this curious event. Even those who do not believe in such miracles have found themselves at the shrine witnessing this exact act taking place. The message that this saint left behind and what the stone represents is that all are brothers in the eyes of the gods and all should love each other as such, regardless of religion and culture. This is why if 11 men are to follow the instructions, the stone will rise. But women are not allowed at the shrine since Qamar Ali was not married upon his passing as a celibate saint. With the story behind the levitating stone being revealed, the question still remains as to how this boulder is actually able to levitate. It defies the laws of gravity and leaves us with an ever-wandering mystery. This strange phenomenon has been a mystery for ages, but many believe it to be a gimmick or a trick of sorts, and others believe a scientific explanation for the levitation of the 90-kilogram rock could be at play here. Normally, lifting a stone of this magnitude would require a lot of energy and strength. A witness attended the shrine in 1984 and was one of the 11 men who attempted to lift the stone. He claimed to have seen others using the palm of their hands and using a good amount of force, and nothing happened. This witness also said that he was unable to pronounce the saint's name, and it seemed as though the entire act was done by only 10 men. He explained that no magical levitation occurred, but rather lifting. But they were unable to lift the stone above their heads. This only further supports the set of instructions left by Qamar Ali. Some science enthusiasts made an attempt to explain away this strange phenomenon. They used precise timing as one such excuse. They believe that the chanting of the saint's name holds a precise time when all 11 men will lift at once. Weight distribution also came into play, stating that fingers are strong and that if all the men lift at once, they'll be able to each be holding about 18 pounds. It was also theorized that the men do this with such strong belief that they'll lift the object by sheer force of willpower. But even non-believers have attempted this and come to the same result. It's also noted that if one uses the palm or any other area of their body, the stone will not budge. The number of people also seems to make a difference. It was also found that some people who attempted to remove this stone from the shrine suffered undisclosed consequences thereafter. Although some scientific suggestions were put forward, no one knows for certain how exactly this stone is able to levitate. Ancient India is very much shrouded in mystery. Out of the many, this is one of the strangest phenomena. The idea of a long-deceased entity playing a part in the levitation of a rock is a rather creepy one. Or would he have possibly gained access to the ancient book of the 9 unknown men, as later discussed? Pyramids in the Visoko, Bosnia area, dating to be about 33,000 years old, were discovered in 2005. These supposed pyramids have been kicking up debates for the historical timeline. For ages, these mountains or hills were considered to be natural land formations until an amateur archaeologist, Samir, suggested that they could be much more than this. Samir was also a pyramid enthusiast, and upon his visit to Bosnia, after receiving an invitation to climb the Visosika hill, discovered that something far more mysterious may lie below the thick vegetation. The archaeologist had visited many pyramid sites across the world, and seemed to know a pyramid when he saw one. He noted that these hills had triangular faces and slopes with noticeable corners. It seemed that these formations were deliberate constructs that were long forgotten. In the year of 2005, Samir hired construction companies and geologists to do some research into the rocks that were found there, and also requested them to do some core drilling, which subsequently led to the announcement that the first ever European pyramids had been discovered. Samir stated that the construct could be some sort of burial site. However, he believed it to be an ornamental piece. Based on the structure and rock elements of the 350-foot hill, Samir concluded that the entire construct was indeed that of a pyramid. This particular pyramid was nicknamed the Pyramid of the Moon by the archaeologist. On the opposite side of the town, Visosika Hill can be found, which is one of the biggest and most ancient pyramids, known to Samir as the Pyramid of the Sun, with a summit of 720 feet. A third pyramid can be found within the hills, all of which date back to at least 12,000 years ago. Luckily for the amateur archaeologist, many have been perceptive to this idea, including prime ministers and presidents. Many Bosnians have also become drawn to the idea of such an incredible past. But such claims are met with the term of pseudo-archaeology by skeptics, who were quickly shut down and named anti-Bosnian. Initially, the archaeologists thought that the constructs were artificial. With the use of a compass, it was determined that the Visosika Hill lit up with the cardinal points. Each surface was facing north, south, east, and west. Although some scientists have explained away this idea, some presidents stated that an expert is not needed in order to determine that the hills are the remains of 3 pyramids. Samir has also given lead to many digs on the site and discovered the remains of artificial walls, which he believed were built by an advanced ancient civilization. Given that many advanced megalithic builds exist, this would not be considered a far-fetched hypothesis. The archaeologist also discovered underground tunnels which still remain a mystery. The Bosnian pyramids are made up of 5 individual constructs, with the largest being 220 meters or 722 feet. In April of 2006, researchers had been digging into the sides of these pyramid hills and unearthed geometrically sliced stone blocks. These blocks were believed to be the outermost region of the pyramid. Samir stated that these blocks were part of the first wall uncovered belonging to the construct. He also believes that this pyramid, the Visosika Hill, is what's known as a step pyramid, and he would know since he studied the pyramids of Latin America for 15 years. Samir was quoted saying, quote, "It's so obvious that the top of the blocks, the surface, is man-made." Previous research was done on this hill, and it was discovered that each slope lies at an angle of 45 degrees with a flat top. It was under many layers of dirt that researchers uncovered an entrance to the level, as well as entrances to the aforementioned tunnel system. Through satellite and thermal imaging, 2 smaller pyramids were discovered in the Visoko Valley. After further excavations, it was determined that the tunnels were interconnected with the 2 other pyramid hills. It was proclaimed by geologists and other science professionals that the structure was a man-made building. According to some reports, the tunnel systems within these pyramids have some sort of healing energy as well. 5 international scientific conferences were held in 2008, 2011, 2012, 2013, and 2014, where specialists have given reasons for the supposed healing energy found here. It's believed that within the ancient tunnels of the pyramids, electromagnetism is consistent. Along with this is the Schumann resonance of 7.83 Hz. The Schumann resonance is said to be the best field of energy for all humankind in terms of physicality, mentality, and spirituality. In addition to this, it was also discovered that a high number of negatively charged ions were detected, 10 times that of the forests or mountains. There were also no harmful rays present, nor was there any natural radioactivity. In such an environment, one can begin the process of regeneration and healing. Samir has been nicknamed the Bosnian Indiana Jones due to his fashion style and his career path. Samir concluded that these pyramids that he discovered were created by the ancient European society, much like the other pyramids that are found across the world. A Serbian tennis player also made the effort of visiting the pyramids. It was discovered that he made 2 trips to the area, once in July and again in October. He had even invited some fellow tennis players and other athletes to join him, and to take advantage of the healthy oxygen and clean energy. Another visitor at the age of 67 years old visited the tunnels beneath the pyramids as well, and reportedly was able to breathe better and felt lighter. He also claimed to feel as if he were receiving energy. With the use of radiocarbon dating, it was determined that the pyramids in question actually dated back 25,000 years, significantly more than the previously thought 12,000 years. It was also revealed by the team of archaeologists led by Samir that there's an energy beam in the center of the Pyramid of the Sun. The beam has a radius of 13 feet, and an electromagnetic field of 28 kilohertz. This was confirmed by a physicist, an anthropologist, a sound engineer, and an electrical engineer. Samir believes that these pyramids were built for the purpose of the energy beam. The pyramids and the energy serve as a source of power and clean energy. And as previously determined, the energy found within these tunnels and pyramids has a healing ability. This further supports the theory in the book titled The Giza Power Plant, written by Christopher Dunn. It was found that the Pyramid of the Sun is 30% larger than the largest Giza pyramid. Although this amateur archaeologist has been met with a lot of backlash and claims of a pseudoscience, as well as supposed debunking from other science personnel, Samir remains set on his theories. The Bosnian, as well as other pyramids, are a long-lasting mystery which are yet to be solved. Samir also wrote in a blog post that this discovery would further prove the existence of an advanced and lost civilization in southern Europe, with no written records. That being said, whether or not these hills are in fact pyramids of an ancient time, created by an advanced civilization, will forever be a mystery. Along with that, the curious energy beam and the reasons behind these pyramids being built will also be a puzzling enigma. Over the years, many secret organizations and societies have acted across America. The most well-known of these societies are the Illuminati and the Freemasons. You may be surprised to learn that a society was formed in India by an emperor named Ashoka in 270 BC. They were known as the Nine Unknown Men. The private club was known to have an influence on economic, social, scientific, and political progression. The Nine Men were told to remain a secret from the public, and it's thought that they still exist, with the club's secrets being passed down through the generations. In 270 BC, Ashoka created this society in order to preserve and maintain secret information that may prove dangerous should it fall into the wrong hands. This leads to two different mysteries: who the Nine Men are and what the secrets are that they hold. It was after the war that Ashoka dedicated the remainder of his life to peace and wisdom. He soon came to realize that ancient India was in possession of a strong amount of knowledge which he feared would end up being misused by humanity. It was later believed that the Nine Unknown Men stood for microbiology, propaganda, cosmology, physiology, sociology, alchemy, light, communication, and gravity. Although the exact fields may vary in certain tellings, Ashoka only wanted these men to study, maintain, and advance these sciences, so that this great knowledge would not lead to destruction. The most fascinating aspect of this society is that each man had the task of creating a book for their field, which would be updated and revised and eventually passed on to a carefully selected candidate, should one of the men pass away, have health complications, or resign. An English writer named Talbot Mundy published a book titled The Nine Unknown Men in 1923. Mundy had done extensive research before writing his book, and even went as far as getting a hold of the transcripts that the emperor himself had written. His research confirmed that the 9 books were as mentioned previously, and that was physiology. The first book was said to cover a technique known as the touch of death. It's also believed that a piece of this writing had been leaked and resulted in judo, the martial art. Communication was the next book, which spoke of extraterrestrials. Apparently, this organization knew that there was a life beyond our planet and could communicate with them. The Book of Gravity spoke of aircraft and other aspects of gravity. In microbiology, the book focused on both microbiology and biotechnology. Propaganda discussed warfare strategies, and cosmology spoke of universal concerns. The next book detailed aspects of alchemy and transmutation. The Book of Light was one of light and speed and how to use these features as a weapon. Sociology, the last of the book, provided methods for the prediction of society's destruction. This only makes up a little amount of what's believed to be in these books. With only some information being leaked over the years, in the 1960s, Jacques Berger and Louis Pauwels explained that the society was real, and Pope Sylvester II was showcased in their book titled The Morning of the Magicians. It's believed that the Pope had met with this strange society in order to gain knowledge, and this he did. He learned how to fashion a bronze head and empower it to answer yes or no questions. The Pope also possessed many other interesting artifacts after gaining the knowledge of these beings, but they were all destroyed upon his passing. Many strange events have been suggested to be the works of the secret society of the Nine Unknown Men. Although most of the contents of these books remain a mystery, It's believed that the Society occasionally, intentionally releases information from their books when humanity is in need or to aid in advancements in sciences. Secret organizations have been a feature referencing an advanced civilization throughout time. The Society of the Nine Men seems to be one of the oldest and possibly the most powerful of all. Another interesting detail about this mysterious society is that well-known historical artists and scientists knew of the society and were part of it, namely Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, and APJ Abdul Kalam were all supposed members of this organization. Over the years, the Society of the Nine Unknown Men has begun fading out of the public view, but it is still believed to exist. For many millennia, through scientific studies, we believed that our planet was no different from the rest of the universe. It has been within our knowledge that Earth was like any other planet, a large floating rock orbiting through space. But due to a more recent study as early as the 1960s, there's a possibility that our irregularly formed ellipsoid might be more than just a boulder in a never-ending expanse. In the conclusion that was met through this study, it was stated that our planet Earth may have molded itself into the shape as we see it today. A well-known philosopher, Socrates, relayed the following to one of his students, saying, quote, "The real Earth viewed from above is supposed to look like one of those balls made out of 12 pieces of skin sewn together." And about 2,000 years later, somewhere in the 1960s, Russian scientists encouraged that the planet should be looked at and examined again. The idea being to find any important places across the Earth that formed a pattern. They had found that it did, in fact, harbor a strange design. The scientists published their research and what they uncovered in a science journal. Their installation was titled, "Is the Earth a Large Crystal?" All three of the Russian scientists involved had extensive knowledge of history, electronics, as well as engineering. In their research, the team decided that nothing could have possibly stopped such a pattern being built within the Earth's structure when it began to form. According to them, the form can still be vaguely viewed today. Additionally, another Russian journal for youth theorized that the Earth had initially started life as a large crystal, which later molded itself into its ellipsoid form that we know today. The scientists explained that the supposed crystal can be seen in 12 pentagon-like slabs, a dodecahedron shape, which blanket the Earth's surface. Within this shape, 12 equilateral triangles are present. According to research conducted by the scientists, the geometric construct is evident within the ancient societies and their structures. It's also noted within magnetic irregularities as well as on Earth's fault lines. There are also many locations which show evidence of the geometric pattern, which are seemingly unrelated, each of which are placed on intersecting lines of the grid or along the grid lines themselves. The pentadodecahedron was a hybrid geometrical shape, which had been an obsession of Pythagoras. Other philosophers also refer to this shape as the sphere of the universe. Similarly, Plato also used the shape to describe the Earth's true form. Both Pythagoras and Plato and many intellectual successors were insistent that the powers of the pentadodecahedron were to be kept a secret. In their report, the Russians deduced that the Earth was formed as a large crystal, making use of the angular proportions of the pentadodecahedron. It was stated that over time, the planet became smoothed into a spherical shape. Many theories have already arisen to debunk this supposition, such as the amount of evidence of the continental drift having taken place would certainly disturb these lines which make up the crystal. The movement would have definitely destroyed the crystal's symmetry. Along with this, some have criticized, stating that many maps, such as the one the scientists have made, can be redesigned and produce a similar result. Even though this theory has been through criticism, it's one worth studying. As accounted by many individuals, some of these ancient sites are thought to be more important than we realize and also interconnect with one another. Relating to ancient customs, the Russian scientists have been led to believe that the energy associated with the crystal's geometric pattern is not linear or continuous, but rather ebbs in cycles of a rhythmic dynamic. This rhythm is said to be of the crystal's own mathematical harmony. Within their research, the scientists found a number of anomalies and phenomena that may be explained by the crystalline patterns. Vile vortices was one such discovery. They had found 10 areas which experienced magnetic and climate disturbances, which were spread throughout the globe, which included the Bermuda Triangle. The places listed were said to be where the strange phenomena occurred. Another vortices was found in Africa in the region of Algeria, which was situated on an interception. In the Philippine Sea, another discovery is noted which also falls on an intercepting line. The South Pacific Ocean harbors another, and so does the South Atlantic. Just a little off the coast of southern Africa, another interception can be found. Close to Australia, another resides in the Indian Ocean. All of these vortices connect through the crystalline lines. The study had taken much effort to pinpoint all of these locations where the grid of the crystals corresponded with risings of land, depressions, and ocean floors, faults of the core as well as mid-oceanic ridges. Seismic and volcanic activity were said to be the works of the crystalline pattern as well, along with natural selection patterns, atmospheric pressure irregularities, iron deposits, and according to the report, man, as an element of Earth's biosphere, cannot escape the influence of the Earth's crystal. These geologists had also not been by themselves with this theory. Other anomalies were listed along with the vortices, including volcanoes, the centers of cyclones, which may lay in the nodes of the pattern, with their paths following the lines. Solar radiation was another account, which was present on the border of Egypt and within the Gulf of California. There have also been mineral deposits said to be laying along the lines of the pattern. Some ancient builds are also said to be situated on intercepting points or along the guides of the pattern. Some of these civilizations discovered these key nodes, including the Egyptians and inhabitants of Easter Island, along with the people of northern Mongolia. A New Zealand man by the name of Bruce Cathy, who was an airline pilot at the time, had been working on a corresponding theory of the crystal grid. Bruce believed that his study might be the key to unlocking some of the greater mysteries. Cathy has also been a mathematician as well as a UFO proponent, and in 1968, he made a strange discovery. After Cathy had followed up on UFO sighting reports, he concluded a detection of a geographic pattern. He had stated in his findings that these prominent areas had been too scattered and that it would be impossible for them to fit together, but he was certain that a pattern existed. He also wrote a book titled The Energy Grid, Harmonic 695, The Pulse of the Universe. Cathy hypothesized that within the geometric construct was the cause of the UFO activity. Over time, he was able to create a grid which lies of New Zealand, which was used in tracking UFO movements, and his idea was to prove that this grid can extend over the entire planet. In 1973, French physicist Francis Perrin discovered a natural atomic reactor in Oklo, which is home to 16 other sites of nuclear fission reactions. So, through extensive research by many different scientists, it was deduced that the Earth is in fact blanketed by a grid. On the grid nodes, strange things have reportedly occurred due to the effect of the crystalline powers of the planet. The ancient pyramids of Egypt have always harbored strange secrets that baffled many, including the scientists and archaeologists of the world. One such curiosity can be found with the Great Pyramid of Cheops. These pyramids lie between the two longitudinal lines which created the ancient border between Egypt and its surrounding neighbors. A circle arc drawn from the center of Cheops' pyramid bound the Nile Delta with great precision. Strangely, each corner of the square base aligned perfectly with the north, east, south, and west. However, the precision has since been disturbed due to the shifting of continents. Among the many pyramids erected along the Nile, the Great Pyramid is the one that stands out the most. Many strange mysteries have been uncovered within the pyramid, and after 5,000 years, we're still incapable of comprehending what lies there. The team or individual who conjured up the design of this pyramid did not have the aim of funerary use. There are also a few indications to this, such as the immense size of the pyramid, which is larger than the pyramids which were composed before and after. It was almost as if this pyramid had announced an achievement of some sort. The Great Pyramid is made of 2.5 million limestone rocks and measures more than 13 acres at the base. An archaeologist and engineer, Glenn Dash, who studied the pyramids, stated that the builders of the Great Pyramid of Khufu had aligned so accurately with the cardinal points of better than 4 minutes of arc in 1/15 of a degree. He detailed this in a published study in 2017 called The Journal of Ancient Egyptian Architecture. Furthermore, the 3 largest pyramids in Egypt, the 2 at Giza and the 1 at Dashur, are so accurately placed that you would not expect such intrinsic design from a primitive society without the use of blueprints, computers, or other forms of machinery. It was calculated that the 2 pyramids at Giza had enough stone to build a wall around France at 3 meters high and 1 meter thick. It was widely believed that the pyramids were used as tombs, but some have a more in-depth idea regarding this. Their theory stated that encapsulated within the pyramid's dimensions is numerological and prophetic knowledge. The trouble with the first theory is that the pyramids lacked bodies. The tombs were empty and some were even closed and sealed. In Dash's report, he also found that each pyramid has the exact same mistake. All of them have been rotated ever so slightly counterclockwise from the cardinal points. Some have theorized that this was due to the use of the magnetic poles or the sun's shadow. However, Dash came up with a more sensible hypothesis. He proposed that around 4,500 years ago, the Egyptians used the autumnal equinox, allowing them to create accurate alignments. He set out to prove this theory using what is now known as the Indian circle method. He deduced from this that it had also resulted in a slight counterclockwise effect. In the ancient eras, the Egyptians made use of the night sky to make decisions, such as when to plant crops and again when to harvest them. Throughout the years, scientists have supposed that some of the pyramid alignments may be that of a celestial relation, especially the pyramids of Giza. The problem with this is, if the pyramids had been placed according to the stars, then they would have had to match up with the sky from 4,500 years ago. In the 1980s, Robert Bauval, a researcher, pointed out that the placement of the three Giza pyramids and how they aligned with the three stars of Orion's belt. In 1995, Bauval's idea was made public through a bestseller, The Orion Mystery, in which he expanded on the statement of the pyramids being created to serve as a gateway to the stars. He stated that Orion had aided in the construction of all pyramids, which later became known as the Orion correlation theory. But no physical evidence has indicated that this is the case. Later, this theory had made headway after scientists interpreted the use of shafts present within the pyramid walls. Some speculated that these shafts had something to do with the afterlife and the heavens. Egyptologists in the 1960s examined these shafts and concluded that they were actually star shafts, which were intentionally built to point towards important constellations. Virginia Trimble and Alexander Badawi, two researchers, had discovered one shaft had pointed towards the North Star and the other towards Orion's belt. But more strange alignments lie beyond the pyramid shafts, one being that the sunset of the winter solstice lands above the pyramid of Menkora, which can be seen from the Great Sphinx of Giza. Dr. Living Stecchini, a professor of ancient history at William Patterson College, studied the mathematics which had been involved with the pyramid's construction, along with Peter Tompkins. It was stated in their findings that the Great Pyramid had been a meticulously situated marker where the historical world had been constructed. It was stated that this foundation had been set to true north with a structure that contained the value of pi, and in the chambers of Pythagoras, triangles were used. They continued saying that the builder of these immense constructs must have known the exact circumference of the planet and much more information such as the Earth's orbit and the 26,000-year cycle of the equinoxes. It also appeared that this primitive society had knowledge of gravity and the speed at which light traveled. According to Stecchini, the builders had also been able to calculate the distance from the equator to the poles. Tompkins deduced that the Great Pyramid had been constructed on the same premise of Hermetic geometry, which were known to certain groups, some of which were attributed to the classical and Alexandrian Greeks. More curious patterns and ratios and other findings were discovered in regards to the pyramids, such as the pyramid-to-sun distance ratio, which stated that the height of the pyramid multiplied by 1 billion equals that of the Earth-to-sun distance. In some cases, the parameter of the pyramid may indicate the length of a solar year. The vast knowledge of those who built the Great Pyramids remains a mystery, but they must have been some of the world's greatest mathematicians and astronomers. Even so, it can be unnerving to think that such a primitive and ancient society could have such extensive knowledge without the use of modern technology. The fact that such an ancient society was able to accomplish these precise placements is quite strange and leaves behind an odd feeling. Through the years, many archaeologists and scientists have studied the ancient civilizations, which were thought to be underdeveloped and could not possibly grasp the concept of things such as astronomy or mathematics or construction. Yet they did. The primitive societies might not be as primitive as we believed, and this could be a strangely unnerving discovery. Scientists have discovered since the dawn of civilization, strange constructs had been built, constructs that require advanced knowledge. Some of these builds have similar methods to other constructs, even though they're ages apart from one another. Such is evident with the pyramids and the megalithic builders on either side of the Atlantic, who constructed their builds for purposes such as astronomical observatories. These monuments have been specifically and mathematically aligned in accordance with planetary and other ideas in mind. The extensive knowledge used in these buildings far exceeds what archaeologists and scientists were expecting. To put this into perspective, the temple building of the classic times took a lesser effort to construct than that of the pyramids. One such immense example is that of the mound of southern Britain, known as Silbury Hill, which has been calculated at taking a total of 18 million hours to complete, and that was in the 2nd millennium BC. What still baffles the scientists and archaeologists is how exactly these supposed primitive societies were able to create these buildings, each of which had stone blocks cut to precision without the use of modern tools, and have been specifically calculated to stand a certain way for a certain reason. Throughout these many discoveries, some questions have arisen, one of which begs how it was possible for a primitive and underdeveloped society to lay on monuments in such a specific way in coordination with territorial geometry, a geometry that's only been more of a recent discovery, and partly made of astronomical function. One such pattern is evident in Stonehenge. In 1909, Sir Norman Lockyer, who authored Stonehenge and Other British Stone Monuments Astronomically Considered, published a strange pattern of geometric construct that he noted had the apex at Stonehenge. In his research, Sir Norman had discovered that the midsummer sunrise line tracked all the way backwards exactly 9 miles out to a Neolithic religious center known as Grovely Castle. There had also been the exact same distance between Stonehenge and Old Sarum, a hilltop where the Salisbury Cathedral was built. When all three areas had been examined on a map, it created an almost perfect equilateral triangle. Interestingly, when the Salisbury Cathedral was erected in 1220 AD, it had been mathematically placed in line 2 miles from Old Sarum. In the 1920s, Alfred Watkins theorized the idea of a ley system. A pattern had been marked on the face of Britain of a vein construct, which crossed over another much like that of a spider's web. In his findings, he suggested that Sir Norman's triangle could become elongated if the midsummer sunrise had been taken far beyond in both directions where they could join up with more ancient sites. In a northeasterly direction, there would be the hilltop known as Ink Pin Beacon and the Winterbourne Camp of Neolithic construct. And in the southwesterly direction, past the Grovely Castle, the line crossed over primitive settlements where it eventually rested on the southern coastline of Britain at the Punnell Beacon. The entirety of the line measured a daunting 100 kilometers. According to a study, it was uncovered that the Giza pyramid had 8 faces and not 4. Each of the sides are crimped in the center and have an inward concave angle at 1 degree, thus forming 8 perfect 90-degree right-angled triangles. Additionally, the position allows the sun to illuminate just one of these faces per year, which further proves that 8 sides are visible. One side is shown on one day each year. What's even more alarming is the fact that on each of these days, the following occurs: the vernal solstice, the summer solstice, the autumnal equinox, and the winter solstice. What was also present within Sir Norman's study was that of stone circles, such as the ones that are found in Cornwall, Stanton Drew, and Scotland. He discovered that these circles had not just been aligned with the sun, but also with other stars in the sky. It was determined by another archaeologist, Boyle Somerville, that present circles at Clava in Scotland, which are stacked on top of each other, had presented a common measurement that had to be used in order to achieve this. It was stated in more studies that the primitive civilizations had made use of materials that they found around them, which aided them in more complex movements with almost 100% accuracy. Along with this, they had been able to detect elliptical orbits and irregularities, which are not simple things to come by. It was found that pyramids and other monolithic builds had been used for astronomical studies and required extensive knowledge of mathematics and astronomy itself. But the mystery remained as to how these societies had come to find such knowledge without the use of written languages and blueprints. Some have questioned if these people had evolved independently with the influence of one supposed genius. Another theory is that of Druidic connection. Druids are said to have carried information by word of mouth and taught their students when they learned these capabilities by heart. The fact that a primitive society was able to draw up these constructs in study of the world is a strange idea to comprehend. It seems their knowledge could have come from anywhere, and they're not as underdeveloped as archaeologists and scientists thought. it can be speculated that another ancient or otherworldly society is responsible. Our unstable planet is subject to many erroneous events. Occasionally, we experience the shifting of continents or a changing magnetic field. Sometimes it's the sudden disintegration of people. We've even had balls of lightning striking at random throughout the world. All of these phenomena have been met with very little understanding. Therefore, it does not sound illogical to assume that similar effects occur within the known universe. The arrangement of the sun and planets have not always been exactly the same as we know it today. This theory has been proposed by Immanuel Velikovsky in 1950. Velikovsky theorized in his published book titled Worlds in Collision that the planet Venus had actually been a more recent entry to the solar system after having spun off from Jupiter, where it then settled into its orbit only less than 4,000 years ago. This book was followed by Earth in Upheaval and Age in Chaos, and these books presented the controversial questioning of certain Bible verses being of absolute truth. Velikovsky prefaced his book as follows, saying, quote, "Harmony or stability in the celestial and terrestrial spheres is the point of departure of the present-day concept of the New World, as expressed in the celestial mechanics of Newton and the theory of evolution of Darwin. If these two men of science are sacrosanct, the book is hearsay." Velikovsky's theory was this. Somewhere within the ancient times, the planet Venus had come into close proximity to Earth, which led to the occurrence of catastrophic events. This theory had quick overreactions by the rest of the scientific community. Professor Harlow Shapley, who was director of the Harvard College Observatory, stated that if Velikovsky was right, then the rest of them were crazy. Another scientist by the name of Dean McLaughlin, who was a professor of astronomy at the University of Michigan, also fought against Velikovsky's proposals. Neither of these men read the book, and pressure had been put on the publisher of Velikovsky's book and it was dropped, but later published by another publisher, making it a bestseller. Velikovsky had studied law and history as a child, and in 1921, he graduated in medicine. He found himself in America in 1939, where he studied Israelite early history. Within his research, he discovered that the history of the Old Testament actually happened. It was detailed of the disastrous results which had been offset by the Earth's near collision with a heavenly body, which caused the world to either stop rotating or tilt its axis, which thereafter caused cataclysmic events and flooding. In the Bible, it was stated by Joshua that the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, and it didn't go down about a whole day. This event may have actually taken place. The Aztecs reported of a star that smoked, and it stated that the sun did not show for 4 days until a great star appeared. The Peruvians called it Chasca, which translated to the wavy-haired. Greek myths spoke of a blazing star that nearly ended the world with fire and then caused flooding. In Babylon, Venus was referred to as a wild cow, which they said filled the land with venom. The Assyrians called the planet the fearful dragon, which was clothed in fire. All of these reports proved that there had been more similar events in other areas throughout history. Velikovsky was able to deduce from all of this research that Venus had been the cause of the cataclysmic events. He also reported in his findings of immense hurricanes, burning of forests, dust and stone falling from the sky, mountains melting, boiling seas and rain, earthquakes that destroyed cities, tsunamis and waves moving to the poles and back again. In 1950, another theory was set in circulation, uniformitarianism. This theory stated that all of Earth's geological features needed some sort of explanation, which had been the idea that these features had been the result of a gradual molding process. Velikovsky made a modification to this theory, calling it catastrophism, which said that random natural events had an effect on evolution, and that it would most definitely happen again. These ideas became more accepted by the scientific world. Numerous catastrophic events had been discussed thereafter. These events had been that of the split of Pangaea, magnetic polar reversal, huge meteor showers, axis tilting, and the cracking of Earth's surface may have all been set off by the near collision of Venus. Velikovsky made a number of predictions which had been proven. Dr. William T. Plumer from the Massachusetts University had stated in his findings that discoveries made by planetary astronomers had been correct predictions belonging to Velikovsky. He went on to list predictions of Velikovsky's, such as that Jupiter is a likely source of radio waves, and Earth should be equipped with what is known as a magnetosphere. Venus's surface should be hot, and that it may reveal an odd rotation, along with being blanketed by petroleum hydrocarbons. However, only his last Venus prediction has been said to be false, yet the rest, strangely enough, were on point. Many years of research revealed that Venus had a toxic atmosphere, which is riddled with carbon dioxide and covered in yellow clouds of sulfuric acid. These clouds are known to trap heat, which causes a runaway greenhouse effect, and is now known as our solar system's hottest planet, with a temperature of 900 degrees. So it's no wonder that a close collision resulted in such disastrous events. The surface is stationed with mountains and volcanoes, which may still be active. Venus is also equipped with an air pressure more than 90 times that of Earth, similarly to the air pressure you'd expect to find a mile below the ocean. This means that Velikovsky was right about the heat of Venus. Another accurate prediction was that Venus rotates backwards, which means that for Venus, the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, which is opposite to that of Earth as well as other planets, except for Uranus, which spins on its side. These are the only strange features of Venus. Even though the planet is inhospitable, it's widely believed that it hadn't always been that way. According to research and missions which have been sent out to observe the planet, we found the presence of granite rocks, which would need the aid of water in order to form. It's speculated that there may have been liquid water on the planet less than 300 million years prior. Venus also experiences gravity at 90% of that of Earth's, and is made up of 96% carbon dioxide, 3% nitrogen, and 1% unknown gases. It's also been speculated by scientists that a similar event of a close collision may occur in the next couple billion years, but the chance of the planets coming into contact is 1 in 2,500, and if this had to happen, both worlds would be destroyed. One of the best examples of strange, unsolved astronomical and mathematical knowledge among the ancient societies is that of the Dogon tribe. They resided within the South Sahara Desert in Mali. These primitive people seem to exhibit knowledge of a tiny star, so tiny that it's invisible to the naked human eye. The star is said to orbit Sirius, which is the brightest star. They had extensive information of this star, such as its weight, having an elliptical orbit, and Sirius's position within that orbit. It was initially speculated that they'd been told about the star by explorers, but it hadn't been discovered by Western astronomers until somewhere around the 19th century. This star, known to modern astronomers as Sirius B, has become a basis of Dogon beliefs for ages. According to the tribe, they believed that inhabitants of another planet, which was attached to Sirius B, had come to visit them and provide them with this remarkable knowledge. In his book titled The Sirius Mystery, Robert Temple discussed that the Dogons may have been the last tribe to have worshipped otherworldly amphibians. It was said that these creatures had landed in the Persian Gulf, and their existence had been indicated in drawings of gods of ancient Babylon, Egypt, and also Greece. In his book, Robert further explains that the tribe referred to these amphibious creatures as nomos, and state that they have to live in water. The drawings depict and refer to an arc structure, which came down from the sky, making a spinning and whirling motion. The noise was described as thunderous. In other accounts, it's said that the machine released flames, which may refer to an exhaust of a rocket. The Dogon also differentiate between the arc, which landed, and the object in the sky, which is said to have been the main spaceship. Robert Temple had gone back to the origins of Dogon in Libya, where he found a connection between the Dogon Nomos and the amphibian god of Babylon, Voronezh, who's said to have taught mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, social organization, and written language with the help of its partner. In simplified terms, as said by Professor Carl Sagan of Cornell University, all the arts necessary for making the transition from a hunter-gatherer society to the first civilization. The Dogons relayed that the Nomos inhabited a planet which orbits another star within the Sirius system. Nomos has also awarded the Dogons with the knowledge of our solar system, including that of Jupiter having 4 moons, Saturn was equipped with rings, and that all planets orbit around the sun, all of which had only been discovered after the invention of the telescope by Galileo. There also exists a 400-year-old artifact which shows the Sirius construct. Apparently, since the 13th century, the Dogons held ceremonies which celebrated the circles of 2 stars, Sirius A and Sirius B. Some of these stories told by the Dogons, though, did not render as factual. One such belief was that Sirius B had been in the place of where the sun is today, but this idea has been debunked. Another idea which did not make sense was that the Dogons celebrated the orbit of Sirius A and B, which is said to be 50 years, yet they held their celebration every 60 years. A fragment remains of the Babylonian history, which had been written in Greek by priest Voronezh. It details Voronezh as having a whole body resembling a fish, and underneath the head there was another head and human-like feet at the bottom, and joined to this was a fish's tail. According to the records, the creature spoke in a well-articulated human voice. It was also said that the being would dive into deep waters as the sun set, and would reside there throughout the night. According to Robert, the religions involving Nomos and Voronezh has for ages gone unexplained, and he thinks that this is because it's been forbidden to expose the knowledge which had been taught, and therefore the explanations were left in a coded indication, which joined with Sirius. One such clue was the repeating motif of 50, which was an indicator of the orbital gestation of Sirius B, as well as the drawings of the dog-headed deity, which referenced Sirius A, the dog star. Robert had found many different legends which seemed to repeat the same encounter. One of these legends had been from Rhodes and its initial inhabitants, the Telchines. According to a Greek historian, these people had been one of the first to create statues of gods. The description of the Telchines had been very close to that of the Voronezh and the Persian Gulf fish people. It was furthered by stating that these beings had been of wizard origin and could summon the clouds and rain when they so desired. They had been referred to as demons of the depths of the sea. It was also written that these beings had dog heads and, in the place of hands, flippers. According to the story, the Telchines had fled, and the survivors were made into the 50 hounds of Actaeon. This had been key evidence of Sirius, which Robert Temple gathered. Temple also concluded that the geodetic methods used by the ancient Egyptians had been presented to them by the Sirius amphibians. Further on in his research, Temple tracked the oracle centers, and within each a megalith called omphalos had been found. It had been of equal-spaced bands which blanketed the Mediterranean and Near East. This type of system is speculated to have continued even further past these areas. Sirius A is said to have had half the mass of the Sun, and Sirius B has a mass of 95% of the Sun. However, this is not immediately apparent due to the fact that it's made of a degenerate matter and is incredibly small. Sirius A is 10,000 times brighter than Sirius B, which is 35.5 the luminosity of the Sun. This would mean that being underwater was probably the best solution to not be blinded by the luminosity of the star, indicating that the amphibians probably evolved to spend most of their time underwater and did not gain the ability to use the land as well. But a part of them would also have to be somewhat mammalian in order to exhibit the brain sizes that would be needed for so much knowledge. According to Dogon's tradition, the Nomos were said to breathe through clavicles. It seems as though the mystery of the Nomos remains a controversial debate of their existence. But with so many different accounts in different areas stating more or less the same thing, it's difficult to pass off as just another legend. Some truth must be held in these drawings and reports by the Dogons and other ancient civilizations regarding the passed-on knowledge of these amphibious creatures. In 1992, 20-year-old Kinley Methuen was studying at Arcadia University in Wolfville, Nova Scotia, where her sister, Kyrene Willis, was also a student. And by the third week in September, he was in his second week of classes. Though he was fond of traveling and exploring on his own, he had told his parents that he was nervous to start his first semester at university. But he soon made friends and seemed to fit in easily. Kinley and his new friends often visited popular spots in the area, such as the Look-Off, which offers stunning views of the ocean and the surrounding area. They also visited 3 pools, where they marveled at the waterfalls that can be found there, and often stayed to have a swim. Before his mysterious disappearance, Kinley traveled to Lunenburg County with a few of his friends, where they spent the weekend jet skiing on Corcombs Island. When the group got back on the weekend of the 18th of September, Kinley attended a party that was being held on the university's campus. Kyrene would later tell investigators that she and several other people saw Kinley at Crowell Tower Dormitory on the 20th of September. The following week, he was supposed to attend a chemistry class but failed to show up, and he also missed his calculus class, which his friends found strange. When Kyrene hadn't heard from Kinley for a few days, she spoke to 2 of his new friends who told her that they had last seen him at a local laundromat, which they also found to be strange since his dormitory building had its own laundromat that students could use. Tom Gordon, one of Kinley's new friends, stated that he was certain he saw Kinley walking on Main Street and was under the impression that he was headed towards an ATM machine. When there was still no word from the missing man, he was reported as missing by his family, but investigators believed that he'd likely left campus of his own accord and would return a few days later. Todd Baker, the dormitory resident assistant, stated that he saw Kinley ironing his clothes on the Sunday before he went missing. Kinley's family was at a loss as to why the Royal Canadian Mounted Police had not been called in to aid in the investigation, as they felt the local police weren't taking the case seriously. Before long, rumors started to spread that Kinley may have been at a sports bar called Anvil, where he may have gotten into an altercation with someone, though this was mere speculation. Others thought that he may simply have gone for a walk in the surrounding area and either fell or somehow ended up in the water, but again, there was no solid evidence to suggest that this was the case. When there was no sign of Kinley and he still hadn't made contact with his family, the RCMP finally got involved in the case, and his family was hopeful that investigators would now be able to make some progress on the case. Soon, a theory emerged that Kinley may have been the victim of a serial killer named Andrew Paul Johnson, since Johnson was known to have committed his heinous crimes in the surrounding area, and was believed to be in the Corcombs Island area when Kinley and his friends were also visiting. But this theory has also not been proven. Ian Stillwell, one of Kinley's friends, then reported that he saw Kinley a few months after he disappeared, and that they went camping in the Annapolis Valley, and that he saw him in Halifax, specifically at a venue called the Paris Club. And although this seemed very unlikely, Ian was adamant that this report was accurate. Another witness would then come forward to report that they'd seen Kinley in their hometown of London in Ontario. In her report, she stated that she heard a knock at her door one night, and when she opened it, Kinley was on the other side. He didn't seem in any way distressed, and told her that he was working for Greenpeace. She would eventually invite him into the apartment, where they spent some time talking. She then saw a photo of Kinley when she was visiting family on Cape Breton Island, and they found that they were distantly related. Kinley's case still remains unsolved, and investigators welcome any information that's offered. Kinley is described as having brown hair and green eyes and stands 5 foot 9 inches tall at the time that he went missing and weighed about 150 pounds. He was last seen wearing blue jeans and a purple t-shirt and a baseball hat. He was also carrying a red and black backpack. A $150,000 reward is on offer to anyone who comes forward with information that leads to Kinley's case being closed. If you have any information on the case, you're urged to contact the Southwest Nova Royal Canadian Mounted Police Major Crime Unit at 902-365-3120 or the Nova Scotia Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. As a child, Jessie Foster grew up in Kamloops, British Columbia, Canada, and after graduating from high school in Calgary, she moved to the US in 2005, but made sure to stay in touch with her family back home on a daily basis. Her sister informed her that she would be getting married in April of the following year, and so it's known that Jessie was planning to travel back to Canada to attend. But before she could do so, she would suddenly go missing without explanation, and nearly 18 years later, she's still not been located. At the time of her disappearance, Jessie was living in Las Vegas, and she last spoke to her family on the phone a month before her sister's wedding, on the 28th of March, 2006. 6 days later, her boyfriend, with whom she shared an apartment, reported that she'd gone to a dentist appointment but never came home. When he checked the apartment, he found that all of her belongings were missing, with the exception of her hairdryer and makeup, which her sister says she would never intentionally leave behind. All attempts to contact Jessie were unsuccessful, and so her family reported her missing on the 9th of April. Investigators then learned that they saw her on Christmas Day in 2005 when she visited for the holidays, but she flew back to Las Vegas that same day. In desperation, Jessie's parents traveled to Las Vegas, where they handed out missing person flyers and spoke to people in the area where she went missing, in hopes that a new lead would turn up, but they were unable to glean any new information. Her family decided to hire a private investigator, and through his investigation, they learned that Jessie had become involved in street work and that her live-in boyfriend, Peter Todd, was actually her boss and not her fiancé as she had told them. Todd would tell investigators that when Jessie left the apartment, she took all of her clothing with her but left her car behind, which they found strange. Todd was, however, cooperative when he was questioned and stated that he believed she simply left because she'd met someone else, and he's not considered a person of interest in her disappearance. Jessie's sister told investigators that they had a conversation during which Jessie stated that she wanted to leave Todd and that she'd already started packing her belongings in order to do so. Investigators found it strange that the $20,000 in Jessie's bank account has not been touched since her disappearance, and that her bank account has seen no activity whatsoever, which would not likely be the case if she'd simply left of her own accord. Alarmingly, 3 other street workers went missing in the Las Vegas area between 2003 and 2006, but Jessie is the only one who's not been located yet. The case went cold until 2015, when investigators started to suspect that a man named Neil Falls may have been responsible for Jessie's disappearance, since he was linked to several other similar cases, but he lost his life on the 18th of July of that year. Investigators have released a forensic sketch of what Jessie would likely look like in the present day, and they're hopeful that someone will recognize her one day and that she will be found. When Jessie went missing, she had strawberry blonde hair, though it could now be dyed. She had hazel eyes, stands 5 foot 6 inches tall, and weighed around 120 pounds. The last time anyone saw her, Jessie may have been wearing a small princess-cut diamond earrings, along with a ring that contained a similar diamond. If you or anyone you know remembers anything important in Jessie's case, or if you have any information that could lead to her current whereabouts, you're urged to contact the Las Vegas Police Department at 702-633-1773. Alternatively, you can contact the Kamloops, British Columbia Police Department at 250-828-3293. Jessie's nameless case number is MP177. On the 26th of April, 1986, the number 4 reactor at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, which is located in Pripyat, Ukraine, exploded, resulting in a 7-rated severity nuclear event, the maximum measurement for such a catastrophe. More than 500,000 people were involved in the subsequent emergency activities, and to date, it's still considered to be the largest nuclear disaster in history. When all was said and done, an exclusion zone was established, which meant that a 19-mile radius around the plant was off limits, though this area was later enlarged to 1,000 square miles. It was a horrible event that not only could have been prevented, but affected the lives of thousands of people for years afterward, and it's sure to go down in history as one of our greatest ever disasters. There are, though, some reports from the site that have left experts scratching their heads, since they seem to have no explanation. While hundreds of people looked on as emergency crews battled the flames and radiation at the power plant, they noticed strange craft in the sky, and later reported these sightings to the authorities. According to witnesses, when the fire at the plant reached a fever pitch, a UFO descended onto the area and remained there for a total of 3 minutes. Some witnesses also reported seeing a strange light at Unit 4 of the plant, though this was only seen by a handful of people. As if this wasn't strange enough, the arrival of the UFO coincided exactly with a massive drop in radiation levels around the plant, and many people believed that the craft were responsible, suggesting that they'd either been siphoning radiation from the area or merely decided to aid in the emergency response efforts. As the blaze reached its most critical point, radiation levels were measured at 3,000, but just a few minutes later, after the craft was spotted, these levels had dropped to 800, which is a remarkable event. But this isn't the first time that unidentified craft have been spotted at a nuclear disaster site. On the 11th of March 2011, the Fukushima nuclear power plant in Japan suffered an electrical grid failure that was caused by a massive earthquake and the subsequent tsunami. There was insufficient power to cool the plant's reactors, and hence radioactive material was released into the surrounding area. This was only the second 7-rated nuclear accident in history, with the other being the Chernobyl disaster. A monk at a nearby temple reported seeing several UFOs right after a massive explosion at the plant, and he recalled that there were so many of these crafts that he was left in complete disbelief. He since stated that he believes that craft traveled to the area to try to help contain the spread of nuclear materials. Dr. Jensine Andresen added that these types of sightings have been reported for decades near nuclear sites, and stated that she believes these are extraterrestrial beings that are living on Earth, including in our oceans. She's closely studied 39 different similar events that occurred between the 1940s and 1990s. Similar craft have been spotted in several nuclear weapons storage facilities, including Malmstrom Air Force Base, which is located in Montana. On one occasion, officers reported seeing these unidentified craft at the site, and just a short while later, the 10 nuclear-tipped missiles that were being stored at the facility could suddenly no longer be launched. Reports then started to come in that similar weapons at another nearby facility had also been affected after the same types of crafts were spotted there. Though no one can say with any certainty why these craft siphon off nuclear activity at these sites, it's become all but certain that these sightings are real, since they've been reported by so many people from similar sites all over the world. There are theories that these extraterrestrial beings use nuclear power to power their craft, while others think that it may be used for some other unknown purpose. There's also the possibility that they merely meant to lend a helping hand, since they're purported to be living on our planet, and hence they want to preserve it. Hundreds of thousands of people have reported seeing something in the sky that they can't explain at some point in their lives. Although many of these events can be explained away as a misunderstanding of a normal everyday event, some still leave experts and researchers baffled, since they seem too outlandish to be true, yet have been seen by numerous witnesses. It's far rarer, though, for someone to report that they had an encounter with an actual extraterrestrial being. These accounts are often seen as fanciful and possibly faked for attention. But when a large group of people all claim to have experienced the same event, experts are at a loss. Such an encounter is said to have taken place in the city of Voronezh in Russia in September of 1989. The first people to spot anything out of place were 3 school children, 2 boys and a girl, who reported seeing a strange pink light shining in the sky at around 6:30 p.m. while they were playing in the park. Soon after spotting the light, a deep red-colored ball appeared and descended onto the park's grass. As it did so, a crowd of people started to gather as they'd all seen the same thing that the children did. They described the ball as being about 10 yards in diameter, and although they found it hard to believe what they were seeing, things were about to get even stranger. Just a few moments after the orb landed in the park, they were surprised to see a hatch opening on the bottom half. When it fully opened, they realized that there was a figure standing in the opening, only it didn't seem human. When they managed to get a closer look at the figure, their suspicions were fully confirmed, as they were able to make out its facial features. The creature didn't have 2 eyes like a human, but instead had 1 extra eye. Witnesses claimed that it had an impossibly small head, and that it stood about 9 feet tall, dressed in silver clothing similar to overalls. On its feet, it wore what looked like bronze boots, and on the front of its uniform they spotted a strange disc. The creature then walked onto the grass and seemed to look around the craft for a few moments before going back inside. Just a short while later, it re-emerged from the orb with a companion and what witnesses described as a small robot. Those who witnessed the event stated that they were overcome by a feeling of fear that remained with them for days afterward. The 2 creatures seemed to communicate with each other, though no one who was present understood anything that was said. They then produced a strange triangular device that shone brightly, and the 2 figures used it to activate the robot. One of the children that were present became so overwhelmed with fear that he started screaming, but as soon as he did so, one of the creatures stared at him with an intense glare, causing him to become momentarily paralyzed. One of the creatures then produced an item that witnesses described as a weapon that consisted of a 2-foot-long tube. The creature aimed the tube at the boy in the crowd, and in an instant, he disappeared into thin air. He would later reappear unharmed, but only after the orb had left the area. The three figures spent some time in the park, seemingly gathering data on the surrounding area before walking back into the orb and disappearing into the sky at great speed. It's usually the case when these types of events are reported that they're taken with a grain of salt, but on this occasion, the government and news outlets seem to take it much more seriously, possibly because there were so many witnesses present. The Interior Ministry Department's duty officer stated that soldiers would be deployed to the area if the creatures were to return, but added that none of the witnesses had been harmed and no one had to receive medical treatment after the fact. The three children who were present were asked to create a drawing of what they saw, and they were found to be remarkably similar drawings. When scientists were sent to the area to investigate, they found a 20-yard imprint on the ground where the craft had landed, and they also identified two rocks that were later determined to be of extraterrestrial origin. A newspaper correspondent would later visit the landing site and reported that he could still see traces of the craft's landing gear on the ground, describing them as similar to footprints left by elephants. Some people claim to have seen the very same UFO in the area as many as 3 times in a 3-day period, and suggested that the creatures within may have been on a mission to gather as much information about our planet as possible. Whatever the case may be, the craft was never seen in the area again after these reports, leaving the witnesses who were present that day with more questions than answers. When it comes to hauntings, poltergeist activity, and possession, the Methuen water demon account is one that sent shivers down people's spines for decades, as there's still no plausible explanation for what exactly occurred. It all started in October of 1963, on a rainy night in Methuen, Massachusetts, as the Martin family was inside their house watching TV in the living room. It seemed like a normal night like any other, but they were unaware that their lives were about to take a very unexpected turn. Just a few minutes after sitting down in the living room, one of the family members noticed and remarked that there was a small coin-sized damp patch forming on the wall in an area between 2 bookshelves. As they watched, the spot increased to about the size of a dinner plate, and the father, Francis, stood up to take a closer look. He felt annoyed since it was likely that a pipe inside the wall had become damaged, possibly due to becoming frozen at some point, which would be strange since the weather had been quite pleasant leading up to that point. His second thought was that it could have been caused by a drainage backup problem, but he had the system flushed just a few weeks prior, and hence this was also unlikely. But there had to be some explanation, so he took a closer look. When he touched the wall, it felt sticky, and when he mentioned this, the rest of the family joined him to investigate further. They all got a fright when there was a sudden loud popping sound that they described as loud as a firearm being discharged, and in the next moment, a spout of water started shooting out of the wall and left them all drenched. Francis would later recall that the water was freezing cold, describing it as the coldest water he had ever touched. Then, just a few moments after the water started gushing out of the wall, it suddenly stopped, and the family was left baffled. Nonetheless, they started cleaning up the mess that had been left behind, and Francis decided that he would call for a plumber to take a closer look the next day. Before he could do so in the morning, though, another damp spot appeared on a different wall in the house. Soon after spotting it, this damp spot also turned into a spout, more forceful than the first, and the entire family scrambled to save as much of their furniture as they could before the water could do too much damage. About 20 seconds after the water started streaming out of the wall, it suddenly stopped, just as the spout had a day earlier. But the family's woes were far from over. For the next few days, they were left running around the house, trying to stop the water from damaging their home, as a new damp spot seemed to appear every 15 minutes. Strangely, the water never seemed to come out of the same spot twice, and before long, they had no choice but to look for somewhere else to live temporarily until the problem was solved, as the entire house was covered in water and had become unlivable. They contacted Francis's mother-in-law, who lived a short distance away in Lawrence, and asked if they could stay there for a few days until the problem was fixed, to which she readily agreed. Relieved to finally be dry and out of the house, they arrived at the house, but their relief was short-lived when they discovered that the same problem had seemingly followed them. Just a short while after arriving, 5 different damp spots appeared in different rooms in the house, and soon they too were flooded with icy water from the walls. They phoned the local deputy fire chief, who traveled to the residence and did a check of all the house's pipes, but he was unable to find anything wrong with them. One deputy reported that he was standing in a room in the house when he suddenly heard the same loud popping sound before a 2-foot stream of water came shooting out of the wall next to him. With no answers to the mystery, the family decided to rather go back to their own home and made sure that the water supply was turned off and that the pipes had been completely emptied. The problem had seemingly been solved, as there were no further incidents that evening, but the next morning it seemed to be even worse than before, as damp spots kept appearing all over the house before exploding in water cascades. Where these damp spots had appeared one after another the first time, they were now occurring simultaneously, and there was no way of stopping them since the water had already been turned off. Inexplicably, each of the spouts would only last for 20 seconds, just like before, and eventually the family had no choice but to return to Lawrence. But the same thing happened there again, and once more they were forced to go back to their own house. Francis started to believe that some strange force was ordering them to stay home, since he could find no logical explanation for what was happening. The activity in the house continued for a few more days before fewer and fewer damp spots started to appear, and eventually they stopped altogether. The family's ordeal had finally come to an end, but they were no closer to explaining the strange event, and even decades later, there's still no telling what forced them out of their home, only to follow them wherever they fled. Most of us are familiar with the strange tale of the lost colony of Roanoke, which was created by Sir Walter Raleigh in an attempt to establish the first ever English settlement in America in 1585. Those who are familiar with the tale also know that the entire colony mysteriously vanished without a trace, and considering that it had 120 members, it's an inexplicable mystery indeed. But the Roanoke colony isn't the only large group of people that seemingly disappeared without explanation, as a similar event took place in Greenland in 1408, and we're only now starting to gain an understanding of what may have happened to the Vikings that once settled there. There are many historical documents that tell us about the people who lived in the Valsey Fjord area. Vikings had been living in the area for a long time since Eric the Red arrived there in 985. For the next 4 centuries, the Vikings lived prosperously in the area, and seemingly had no hardships, since they surely would have left the area if this were the case. But the last piece of information that we have about the people who lived in the area is contained in a series of letters written in the early 1400s, recounting a marriage and one account of one person who was executed for witchcraft. Nothing else is known about the colony after that, as they seemingly vanished without a trace, and without any obvious reason. Historians have been left baffled by this, as there are no documents that recount any famine, natural disasters, or conflicts, and by all accounts, the colony was well organized and happy to be living in the area. When European settlers arrived in Greenland in the 1700s, they stumbled across what remained of the colony. Nothing but a set of ruins, and not a single person in sight. They looked for clues as to what may have become of the Vikings, but found none, and couldn't explain why they had simply disappeared. Given that the Vikings were fearless and were used to harsh conditions not only back home but on the high seas, it was presumed that a terrible event must have occurred to force them out of their well-established colony. But even this theory couldn't be explored, as there were no signs that anything had gone wrong. The new settlers were surprised to discover that the Vikings hadn't merely existed, but seemingly thrived, as they'd built lavish homes, established huge farms, decorated their houses with stained glass windows, and had plenty of farm animals to keep the colony fed. There was even evidence that they'd traded some of their goods, walrus tusks, polar bear furs, and the like, suggesting that they were not only proficient, but were ahead of their time, which would explain how they were able to live in the area for 4 centuries. There have been many theories put forward in an attempt to explain what happened to the colony, the first of which suggests that they arrived in Greenland between the years 900 and 1300, during the medieval warm period when sailing between Scandinavia and Greenland was easy. This would also explain how they were able to produce excellent crops on huge farms. Some people theorize that they would eventually over-farm the land, leading to soil erosion and the depletion of their wood supplies, forcing them to relocate. Another theory is that a volcano erupted in Indonesia in 1257, causing the entire planet to rapidly cool down. This may have resulted in a long period of famine in the area, since farming would have become much harder, and eventually the colony had no choice but to search for a more feasible area to live in. These are all merely theories though, and research is still ongoing in an effort to explain why these Vikings suddenly disappeared. It's likely that this mystery will be solved in the future, but for now we can only speculate. In recent times, conspiracy theories have started to crop up that suggest the world as we know it is run by a select group of people who have complete control over the entire planet's finances, politics, and everything in between. Though most people find this suggestion outlandish and some even find it laughable, it's not as far-fetched as some people believe, as it's known that at least one such secret society once existed in India, though it focused its attention on the preservation of the country's knowledge of sciences, such as alchemy, cosmology, physiology, and microbiology, to name but a few. The secret society, which is said to have been named 9 Unknown Men, consisted of 9 men as the title suggests, and it's believed to be one of the most powerful secret organizations the world has ever seen. According to those who believe the theory, the society was created by Emperor Ashoka in about 270 BC, as he believed the knowledge that had been gathered by Indian scientists over time could be dangerous to all of humanity if it were to be used by someone with nefarious intentions. Ashoka was known as a brutal emperor who laid siege to an area known today as Odisha, but his victory there came as a great expense, as more than 100,000 soldiers lost their lives in the process. Upon learning of this great loss of life, he changed his ways and became a Buddhist, who no longer sought war, but instead focused his reign on acquiring knowledge and a peaceful existence. To ensure that this knowledge was kept secure, he chose 9 men to not only guard the secrets, but to further their scientific knowledge by each keeping a log that contained all of the knowledge that they had acquired. If any of these men were found to be unable to continue their secretive duties due to ill health, death, or old age, they were to be replaced by a suitable successor, since Ashoka ordered that the society should contain exactly 9 members at all times. When author Talbot Mundy learned of the rumors of this society, he became intrigued and decided to investigate further, since he believed he could publish a book on the 9 unknown men. He found that Ashoka also kept his own records and that they detailed much of the work done by the 9 men in the society. He wrote 9 books based on Ashoka's accounts and found that they covered 9 areas, namely physiology, communication, gravity, microbiology, propaganda, cosmology, alchemy, light, and sociology. Though many people believe the society's existence to be dubious, there are accounts of people who encountered them. Pope Sylvester II reported that he once traveled to India for undisclosed reasons, and here he met the 9 unknown men. He claims that while there, they shared some of their knowledge with him, and soon he gained some remarkable abilities. He was taught how to construct a bronze head that could give yes and no answers through a system that's comparable to binary. It's also said that one of the books, written by one of the 9 unknown men, details research into interstellar travel with the aid of anti-gravity. It's said that some of this knowledge has been used by countries like China in an effort to understand anti-gravitational forces. Swiss-French physician and bacteriologist Alexander Yersin is best known for discovering the cause of the bubonic plague, and hence he's credited for its eradication. But it should also be noted that he also traveled to India at one point, where he met with the 9 unknown men and was given the knowledge to treat cholera. When it comes to space travel and aerodynamics, there are theories that India had developed working airplanes that could not only fly here on Earth, but in outer space. This theory was further bolstered by Sanskrit texts that were discovered in Tibet. Some of the 9 unknown men's writings were discovered on old palm leaves that were found in southern India. These are said to include information on capturing solar energy and how to communicate with extraterrestrial beings, as well as studies into electromagnetism and the different components found in the sun's rays. Lastly, the secret society also busied themselves with studies on how to control masses of people, and some people have hypothesized that Adolf Hitler managed to obtain some of this knowledge, resulting in the Second World War. Though there's no concrete proof that the 9 unknown men ever existed, there are many scholars and scientists who believe the secret society is still active today, and that its secrets hold many of the solutions to unanswered questions of our world and those beyond. We've all seen the ancient rock paintings created thousands of years ago by people who seemingly kept records of the different animals, plants, and events that they encountered by depicting them on cave walls. Some of these scenes include animals that have long since gone extinct, and in some cases include symbols and images that we're unable to decipher. Others seem to include paintings of objects that should not have existed at the time. One of the most famous being a painting that many people believe depicts a helicopter flying overhead. Then there are those cave paintings that seem to point to the fact that ancient people were contacted by extraterrestrial beings for reasons unknown. One set of such paintings has been discovered in India. Some of the paintings found there, though still spectacular, are not considered to be anything out of the ordinary, as they're thought to have been created by hunter-gatherers and depict what one would expect to find: animals, plants, and the like. Though some of these paintings found in the jungle regions have sent tongues wagging as they seem to contain images of extraterrestrial craft and alien beings. They were discovered by a group of anthropologists that was studying remote tribes in the area, and they were shocked to find that the paintings detailed what looked like wormholes and flying saucers. The area is also known for other strange cave paintings, which depict objects that people at the time should not have been aware of. One set includes not only giraffes and kangaroos that weren't present in the area back then, but also half-human, half-fish creatures. Quite unbelievably, the paintings are still very clear, despite being thousands of years old. Some of the extraterrestrial beings in the paintings are said to hold objects in their hands that could be weapons, though this is mere speculation. Those who have seen the paintings claim that these beings are drawn with no mouths or noses, and that some are shown to have worn some kind of spacesuit. Others include paintings of massive humanoid figures that came down from the sky, possibly wearing protective clothing such as helmets. Others seem to have antennae and are depicted as coming out of saucer-shaped craft that landed on 3 supporting legs, though some people suggested that these are some kind of ray rather than landing gear. There are even local people who worship these paintings, while others have recounted stories from the past in which saucer-shaped craft arrive and are found to be piloted by small humanoid creatures. In many of these tales, 1 or 2 people from a village are taken away in these saucers and are never seen or heard from again. But not everyone is convinced. Some people believe that these ancient people didn't actually see these craft or beings, but wondered whether they might exist, and hence painted their thoughts on cave walls. In one of the paintings, someone is seemingly being beamed aboard one of these craft, as it shows a disc in the sky with several beams traveling toward the ground. Inside the beams, either a person or an object can be seen, suggesting that someone or something was being lifted towards the ship or lowered to the ground. Then there's the painting that seems to depict a wormhole, leading many people to believe that this is how extraterrestrial beings are able to travel the vast distances between planets with great ease. Whether these paintings really do show ancient aliens and their spaceships may never be proven. But there is no doubt that they are unique, and they'll continue to captivate the imaginations of researchers for a very long time to come. Bigfoot is probably one of the most famous cryptids of all time, as sightings of the elusive creature have been reported in areas all over the world, and yet there's still no definitive proof that it exists. Many people have dedicated large portions of their lives to the pursuit of the creature, but despite their dedication and resilience, they've come no closer to finding it. Those who claim to have seen it describe it as a massive bipedal creature covered in brown or reddish fur, and that it has an extraordinarily pungent smell. Some explorers have managed to take photos and video footage of the creature, but inexplicably these always seem to come out blurry or show it hiding just out of sight with only portions of its body visible. But Bigfoot isn't the only terrifying bipedal cryptid in the world, as the Big Grey Man is said to live in the Highlands of Scotland, specifically the second highest mountain in the UK, which is called Ben Macdui. Locals know the creature and say that when someone spots it up in the mountains, they're instantly and inexplicably struck by a sense of intense dread and fear, often resulting in panic. It should be noted that some of the people who reported feeling this way weren't casual visitors to the mountain, but experienced and hardened outdoorsmen who were usually prepared for anything. But it's said that a person doesn't necessarily have to see the big gray man to know that he's in the area. Some hikers have described these exact same feelings when they were out on the mountain, and are said to have no explanation for the fear until they were told about the strange creature. Those who have spotted it, though, report that it's a massive creature that stands around 8 to 9 feet tall, and some have stated that they could feel its pounding footsteps hitting the ground long before it came into view. It's also said to be covered in thick but short gray hair, leading many people to believe that it's somehow related to the famous Bigfoot, though it has an effect on some witnesses that cannot be explained. They've reported seeing strange dark blurs that seem to block out the sky above, while others decide to retreat upon hearing its massive footfalls, only to become convinced that it was chasing after them. There have also been reports that the atmosphere in the area seems to change as soon as it's spotted, as it suddenly becomes as cold as ice. Some hikers become confused when they feel something impossibly cold brush up against them, only to find that there's nothing there. Reports of sightings of the big gray man aren't a modern phenomenon, though, as people have claimed to have encounters with the creature for centuries, not only on Ben Macdui, but near Aberdeen. J. Norman Colley, who was serving as professor of organic chemistry at University College in London in the 1890s, stated that he once encountered the beast while he was out on the mountain one day in 1891. Colley had climbed to the mountain's summit and was on his way back down when he suddenly became aware that there was a second set of footfalls near him. He stated that he could hear a footstep for every 2 or 3 that he gave, and he instantly knew he was being followed by something much bigger than he was. It was a very misty day, and try as he might, he couldn't see the creature, though he was certain that it was there. He continued down the mountain for the next few miles, all the while gripped by an inexplicable fear that resulted in him vowing that he would never set foot on the mountain alone again. Though he never saw the big gray man, he's convinced that it does exist and that it has a strange effect on anyone who ventures too close. Many other people came forward to report that they had similar experiences in the past, but were too embarrassed to talk about them, since they'd become very afraid and were worried that they might be ridiculed as a result. Whether the big gray man really does exist is still up for debate. Much like the ever-elusive Bigfoot, only time will tell if this strange mystery will ever be solved. The Erdstall tunnels aren't found in one specific region of our planet, but have been discovered in areas all around Europe, and their purpose remains a mystery to this day. More than 2,000 of these tunnels have been discovered, with the largest number being found in Bavaria and Austria. An Erdstall tunnel can be identified by its unique features. They're said to be ovular in shape and notably narrow, measuring just a few feet in circumference. In some of these tunnels, explorers have stumbled across strange structures that are thought to possibly be benches, though this is merely a theory. One set of these tunnels was discovered by a dairy farmer when she noticed that one of her cows had seemingly fallen into a pit. She found that the cow, which was unharmed, had fallen in as far as its hips, and she then discovered that the pit was actually part of a much bigger crater that had opened up. She told her husband what had happened, and the following day he went to investigate. After locating the crater, he stuck his head in the hole and was surprised to find that, in fact, a tunnel that stretched diagonally downward into the earth had suddenly opened up. He decided to follow the tunnel to see how long it was and where it led, but he soon realized that he'd been walking for a long time and could no longer hear anything from above. He also found it increasingly hard to breathe, suggesting that he'd traveled a long way down. In recent times, the tunnels have been studied by a group called Working Group for Erdstall Research, and upon entering one of the tunnels, they had to navigate passages as narrow as just 3 inches in diameter. During that same excursion, one member of the team had to retreat back above ground as they found it hard to breathe and suffered a headache brought on by oxygen deprivation. Quite remarkably, the entrances to these tunnels aren't always found in forests and woodland, but can also be found in people's houses or cemeteries. It's also been noted that these tunnels never seem to intersect, and that each tunnel has a single point of entry and a single exit that are often located in ancient settlements. though there are many that seem to originate and terminate in the middle of nowhere. This means that there's no way for air to travel consistently through the tunnels, resulting in a lack of oxygen, which can be very dangerous for anyone brave enough to venture inside. Though no one is certain who dug these tunnels, there are a few theories. The most common belief is that they were created during the Middle Ages and that some of the tunnels are as many as 900 years old, though this is just a theory as no artifacts have been found inside the tunnels to indicate their true age. There's also no mention of the tunnels in any historical documents. Some people have suggested that they were used to store supplies, but researchers are doubtful of this theory, as many of the tunnels are just too narrow for this to be possible, and others often fill with water since they're situated beneath the waterline. It's also possible that they served as types of bunkers where farmers could hide their families against marauders in the area. This would explain the lack of artifacts, as they would only have served as a temporary hiding spot, and any valuables that were brought down would likely have been removed as soon as any danger had passed. It's been suggested that some sections of these tunnels were left intentionally very narrow to ensure that any available oxygen remained in the desired chamber where a family may have been hiding out. This theory is possible but unlikely, as anyone hiding inside would have only had a limited supply of oxygen, and they would have eventually been forced to reveal themselves to the enemy or experience a slow and agonizing demise. There would also be the possibility that marauders could discover the entrance to the tunnel and then decide to block it up, trapping anyone hiding inside. There have even been theories that the tunnels served a more spiritual purpose, and that those who created them believed that they served as passageways for the soul to travel safely to the afterlife. Research continues on the Erdstall tunnels, and hopefully we will find more answers in the near future. But for now, they remain an unsolved and tantalizing mystery. Abraham Lincoln, as many Americans would know, was the 16th President of the United States. He was viewed as a heroic figure by many Americans. He was responsible for issuing the Emancipation Proclamation that declared to free the slaves within the Confederacy. John F. Kennedy was a more well-known American president and was the 35th. Kennedy had joined the U.S. Navy in 1941 and had initially planned on pursuing an academic or a journalistic career before the family's political standard had passed on to him. Aside from both of these individuals being United States presidents, there are other similarities that have connected the two. In 1992, a spooky presidential coincidences contest had been run, and one of the winners was able to find 16 examples between Kennedy and Lincoln. The list of coincidences between the two may be well known, but only a portion of these are found to be true statements. The list starts with both former presidents having 7 letters in their last names. Lincoln had been elected to Congress in 1846, and Kennedy was elected in 1946. Following their presidential elections in 1860 and 1960, 100 years apart. Both presidents had been the victims of assassinations, which coincidentally both occurred on a Friday, and both had been within the presence of their wives. Lincoln had been assassinated in Ford's Theater, and Kennedy had been in a vehicle that had been made by Ford Motor Company. Both of the president's assassins had 3 parts to the name, which were John Wilkes Booth and Lee Harvey Oswald, who had both been assassinated before standing trial. Additionally, both of these names consisted of a total of 15 letters. Booth had fired at Lincoln in a theater and ran to a barn or warehouse, and Oswald fired at Kennedy from a warehouse and fled to a nearby theater. The succeeding vice presidents had both been Southern Democrats and former senators who shared a surname, Andrew Johnson and Lyndon Johnson, each having 13 letters in their name, one of which was born in 1808 and the other in 1908, 100 years apart. Both presidents had allegedly lost 1 child each while living in the White House. While it may appear to be coincidental that their election years had been 100 years apart, such elections are said to only occur in even years. However, it's still coincidental that both the Congress elections and the presidential elections had occurred within 100 years of each president. The list had also only partially gotten the coincidences surrounding the assassins correct. Oswald had indeed been assassinated, whereas Booth had been trapped in a building before being fatally fired at by authorities after he'd refused to surrender. Despite there being some falsifications of the coincidences surrounding these two US presidents, the list is mostly correct. It's certainly strange that Lincoln and Kennedy had so many similarities between them, despite the 100-year differences in their elections. In 1898, Morgan Robertson published a novel titled Futility. At this time, it appeared to be just another book written by the author, who's said to have spent some of his younger years working on ships, and had at one point been promoted to first mate. The novel would only become incredibly famous 14 years later, after it appeared that the story was centered around one of the most famous shipwreck incidents, the Titanic. The sinking of the Titanic sent futility right into the spotlight and had been renamed The Wreck of the Titan. How could a 14-year-old novel possibly be connected to a sinking ship? Futility had told the story of a fictional ship named the Titan that had been the largest ocean liner. In the book, the Titan was considered to be unsinkable, and due to travel across the North Atlantic Ocean, only to hit an iceberg and ultimately sink. Sounds coincidentally just like the Titanic, which was the real life's largest ocean liner, and was considered to be unsinkable as well. The similar names and unsinkability were not the only connections found between the two. Both of the ships were set to travel across the Northern Atlantic Ocean on a cold evening in April. The Titan had hit an iceberg, causing it to capsize, and as we already know, so did the Titanic. The fictional ship was a length of 800 feet, while the other was 882.5 feet, an 82.5-foot difference between the two, and both could travel at 20 knots. The Titan and the Titanic were composed of 2 masts and 3 propellers. The two ships could hold 3,000 passengers, and both did not have enough lifeboats for all of them. Both ships had just over the legal minimum of lifeboats equipped. Over the years, Robertson and his novel have become interwoven with the Titanic. A classic 90s video game called Titanic: Adventure Out of Time used the fictional ship as an Easter egg. It had also been mentioned in a book about the Titanic called A Night to Remember from 1955, and had been spoken of in 2010 during a Doctor Who audio drama called The Wreck of the Titan. Thereafter, Robertson was accused of being clairvoyant, but based on his upbringing and his career, it's easy to see why he had so much information about the ships. As previously mentioned, he had also worked on them for quite some time. Titanic expert Paul Hayer explained that every time someone would run into the author, they would exclaim that he was a psychic, to which he would respond that he simply knew what he was writing about. There are, of course, various differences between the two sunken ships, including the weather conditions on that fateful night. In Futility, the weather had been somewhat adverse, whereas the Titanic had been traveling in normal conditions. The Titan had been on its way from New York to Southampton, and the Titanic had been going the other way around. Regardless, there'd still been a lot of similarities between the two, that it was almost eerie. It appeared that the novel and the author had predicted the ordeal 14 years prior. It's one of the strangest coincidences in history, even though it's said that the author had much knowledge about ships when writing his book. Tsar Alexander II had been born in April of 1818 in Moscow, Russia. He'd come to the throne at the age of 36 after his father's passing in 1855, at the peak of the Crimean War. The emperor had met his demise in a plot that had been sponsored by a terrorist organization in 1881, following many unsuccessful assassination attempts of which he miraculously evaded. In 1866, Dmitry Karakasov had attempted to take the life of the emperor. Alexander II had bore himself heroic in the face of danger, and survived this attempt on his life by a mere miracle. It was in April of 1866 when Alexander had been exiting the Summer Garden in St. Petersburg. A crowd of onlookers had gathered within a respectable distance to watch the emperor make his way to the carriage, and this is when Dmitry had fired. Alexander had been saved by a 28-year-old hatmaker's apprentice named Osip Komisarov. The emperor had paused at the carriage to put his coat on, when Osip had hit Dmitry's hand, allowing the shot to fire into the air instead. A year later, Alexander was traveling with his 2 sons in Paris, where they had attended the World Fair of 1867. On the day of the attempt, the emperor, his sons, and Emperor Napoleon III had been in a carriage when a Polish 21-year-old man named Anton Berezovsky ran up to the carriage and fired at the emperor. but the pistol had exploded and injured the assassin's hand. He was quickly caught by the crowd and interrogated. The punishment had been 40 years of hard labor before being released in 1906. The next assassination attempt had come in April of 1879. Alexander II had been out for a daily walk about the Winter Palace, unattended by the guards. This had allegedly been a habit of his father, Nicholas I. Alexander continued the tradition despite there being 2 previous attempts on his life. As he reached the Moika embankment, a shot had been fired from 12 steps away. The assassin this time was a 32-year-old nobleman and a retired civil servant named Alexander Soloviev, who was said to be a member of a revolutionary group. The first attempt missed the emperor, who had then run for his life. Soloviev had chased after him and fired another 2 rounds. By the 3rd round, an armed officer had caught up to them and had hit him with a saber before making a run for it. But the assassin fired twice more. He was caught and punished. The 4th attempt had been in 1879, when a revolutionary group had planned to cause an explosion on the train on which the emperor was traveling. The assassins placed their 3 explosives on the route. The first was in Odessa, the second near Alexandrovsk. The third was on the approach to Moscow. Coincidentally, the train had changed direction and did not go through Odessa. Additionally, there had been 2 trains, one of which carried the emperor and one that carried the royal belongings. The train on which the emperor had been was 30 minutes behind the other train. There had, however, been a delay on this train, allowing the emperor to proceed in front. The assassins had not known this, however, and allowed the train to pass by. Sometime later, there had been another explosion, but it had been the wrong train. The damage had occurred underneath the 4th car of the train, the fruit storage car. The 5th attempt on Alexander's life had again involved explosives by the same revolutionary group. It had been in 1880 when an assassin had set off an explosion in Alexander's room that was 2 levels underneath the dining room where the emperor was set to receive Prince Alexander of Hesse, who had coincidentally been half an hour late. The explosion had gone off, and the emperor, as well as his family, were unharmed. The assassin responsible was Stepan Kokhturin, who'd made an escape only to be caught and punished in 1882. In 1953, Linus Pauling, a renowned American chemist, presented a triple helix model as the structure of DNA. This model had been different from the double helix model that had been suggested by James Watson and Francis Crick. Pauling would later find that his calculations had been incorrect and the structure was inaccurate. This ultimately led to Crick and Watson's model to be accepted as the accurate representation of the structure of DNA. Even though Pauling's creation had been incorrect, his work in both chemistry as well as molecular biology had been regarded as highly influential, and he made many contributions to society. That being said, there's controversy surrounding the idea as to who should be accredited with the creation of the structure. It was stated that Watson and Crick had stolen data from another scientist, Rosalind Franklin. 2 historians had investigated this case and expressed that there are some parts to the story that are accurate, such as the scientists relying on research that had come from Franklin's lab without permission. In an article, the historians had said that the 2 different research teams had been working in parallel towards solving the puzzle of DNA, and each had known more about the other team than is widely believed. In actual fact, as stated by the zoologist Matthew Cobb, the whole story was far less dramatic than that. The story was set back in the 1950s, when scientists, including Linus Pauling, had been working on how DNA pieces had fit together. Watson and Crick had been modeling the shape of DNA at Cambridge University, whereas Franklin had been studying the molecules at King's College with another scientist named Maurice Wilkins. Franklin was also found to be an expert in X-ray imaging, ultimately leading to the iconic image of DNA's crisscross shape, labeled as Photograph 51. A story told by Watson stated that he'd been able to view the image when he'd visited Franklin's lab. Franklin at this point was said to not have solved the structure, even though it had been months since the image was taken. Watson explained that once he had seen it, he suddenly figured out that it was a helix structure. At around the same time, Crick had gotten an unauthorized lab report that had included Franklin's data and had made use of it without her consent. Based on the story, as well as on Franklin's work, both Watson and Crick were able to solve DNA structure within a few days. The story in question had come from Watson himself in the book, in which he titled The Double Helix, but historians suggest that it was used as a literary device in order to make the story a bit more exciting and understandable. After researching into Franklin's archives, new details have been discovered that would change this narrative, as well as suggest that the scientist contributed more than just one image during the story. The proof was found in a Time magazine article that had gone unpublished at the time. It had detailed the work on the structure as a joint effort between two groups, and a letter from a colleague of Franklin's suggested that she had knowledge that her data was being shared with Crick. Franklin should have been remembered as a contributor and not as a victim. She had later left her research in DNA and pursued some rather important discoveries in virus research. She later passed away, and Watson, Crick, and Wilkins had gone on to receive a Nobel Prize for their double helix structure. As for Pauling's triple helix structure, this had been disproved by the double helix structure due to the mathematical errors that Pauling's had made. From the 24th of December until the 25th of December in 1914, an unexpected and unofficial ceasefire had occurred on the Western Front amidst the First World War. This pause had not been universally observed, and it had not been sanctioned by the commanders. Along 2/3 of the 30-mile-long front that had been under the control of the British Expeditionary Force, the firearms had fallen silent. It was in the summer of 1914 that the European countries had gone to war, believing that it would be over by Christmas of that year. But after just a few months, many soldiers had their lives taken during the heavy conflict. The conflict would soon result in a stalemate, with the front stretching from the Swiss border to the North Sea. December had come to settle in, and so had the reality of trench warfare. The weeks of rain had eventually turned the trench, and the separating island, into mud. For the soldiers on the Western Front, life had been described as miserable, but this misery was shared between two enemies who were separated by 50 yards. These men had seen battle and pain, but were yet to be touched by the worst aspects that the war had come to produce. In the early days of that December, an attempt had been made to secure a truce for the holiday season. Pope Benedict XV hoped that a truce would be called and that a lasting peace could be negotiated, but the enemy was disinterested in this notion. Outside events, though, would ultimately lead to a truce that the leaders had rejected. The German emperor at the time, William II, had sent Christmas trees to the front in an attempt to initiate some morale. On the 23rd of December, the German soldiers would begin setting up their trees outside of the trenches. They would also sing hymns that included Silent Night. On the other side, soldiers could hear these hymns and patriotic songs. They could also see lanterns and trees running along the trenches, and soon messages began to be shouted between the two trenches. The next day, both the British and the Germans left their trenches and met on the land that separated them, no man's land. Here, they would exchange gifts and play football, along with other games. The soldiers took photos together and also repaired their trenches. The troops would also be burying some of their fallen comrades that day. Unfortunately, this ceasefire only occurred in certain areas along the front, and in some places the fighting had persisted, resulting in numerous casualties. Some of the officers had been worried that the truce would undermine the fighting spirit of the soldiers. After 1914, the commands on either side tried to prevent such truces from happening again, but some isolated truces had been held in some instances without the commands knowing, and not only during the Christmas time. In the quiet areas of the front line, brief pauses would be held and agreed upon, allowing either side to repair their trenches, as well as gather those who had passed. It would become known as the live and let live system. Censorship at this time was not imposed on the letters home, and British soldiers had begun to write about playing football and sharing food with their mortal enemies during Christmas time. Such accounts had stressed that these events had been recognized as historically significant. While both sides were able to see that peace would not last, they would use the time of ceasefire to improve their trenches. Coincidentally, 3 of America's founding fathers all passed away on the same day, the 4th of July, Independence Day. These 3 founding fathers had been John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and James Monroe. Monroe had been the 5th president who met his demise in 1831. He'd passed away at the age of 73 in New York at his son-in-law's residence. He had allegedly been ill for quite some time, and the newspapers reported on this illness just before his passing. It was considered a remarkable coincidence because two previous founding fathers, Jefferson and Adams, had both passed away on the 4th of July in 1826, on the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. The strangeness surrounding these events had been detailed in the New York Evening Post in 1831. It was here that the newspaper had called the events a coincidence that has no parallel. On the 5th of July in 1831, the Post reported, saying, quote, 3 of the 4 presidents who have left the scene of their usefulness and glory expired on the anniversary of the national birthday, a day which all other, had it been permitted them to choose, would probably have selected for the termination of their careers. On that day, the New York Commercial Advertiser had written that it would be difficult to find such a parallel in history. 3 of the founding fathers had all been called away in good age on the same anniversary. The Boston Traveler also reported on the strange coincidence a few days later, writing, quote, again our national anniversary has been marked by one of those events, which it may be scarcely permitted to ascribe to chance. The Town Herald had also later marked the passing by noting that it was a strange presidential coincidence. It had described the events as the most remarkable tissue of coincidences that had ever marked the history of the nations. An intriguing blog post had also been made at the Boston University's Historical Society that is said to excerpt Margaret Batten's research on the strange coincidental passings of both Jefferson and Adams. Here, various theories have been presented, ranging from mere coincidence to divine intervention, and that perhaps others had been involved in the departure of the founders. The blog post asks what could possibly explain this coincidence, and proceeds to state that there are at least 6 different principles to explore, but they each may raise further issues. The first explanation was a coincidence. These passings that occurred on the same day may have been just a mere coincidence with no other events attached to them. But it's considered to be a coincidence of considerable magnitude, since the 2 passings occurred on the same day, on the same significant date, and on the same historic anniversary of 50 years. Jefferson had been 7 years younger than Adams, yet his health had been somewhat worse. The fact that the dates had fallen on the same anniversary seemed to stretch beyond mere coincidence, and so further explanations must be found. The second explanation had been of divine intervention. Some believed and interpreted the events to be a matter of divine intervention. Daniel Webster had delivered a eulogy of 2 hours, in which he insisted that the occurrences had been proof on high that the country and the benefactors were in God's care. The third suggestion had been that the 2 old men had been hanging on to life until an important date, the anniversary of Independence Day. The next explanation insisted that other people had been involved. Perhaps there was a silent conspiracy going on among family members, physicians, or even caregivers. It's theorized that the 2 founding fathers' physicians, Amos Holbrook and Robley Dungleson, had played a role in their patients' passings. We may never know what the link had been between the 3 passings of the 3 founding fathers, but it's certainly one of the most eerie coincidences in American history. On the 26th of November in 1922, an Egyptologist named Howard Carter made a rather important archaeological discovery: King Tut's tomb in the Valley of the Kings. This had been the first discovery of a fully intact tomb. Inside of it, there were 2 statues of the pharaoh, who was depicted wearing golden sandals and a crown that was stylized with cobras. This is where the curse of the pharaohs had begun. Thereafter, there had been a documented string of strange and mysterious passings of those who'd been somewhat involved in the excavation. The curse began almost immediately, as that night, Carter's canary had met his demise by a snake. The local people had immediately seen this as a negative omen related to the excavation, an omen that warned them not to disturb the king's tomb any further. Once further excavations had started up, the curse had spread through newspapers. The newspaper detailed that the following inscription was found on the tomb, reading, quote, "Cursed be those that disrupt the rest of the pharaoh." It proceeded to detail what may befall the individuals that break the seal, such as disease that no doctor could diagnose. But there's no evidence that suggests that this had actually been inscribed somewhere on the tomb. After the curse had taken the life of the canary, the next victim had been George Herbert, who was known mostly as Lord Carnarvon. He'd been the founder of Carter's expedition and had also been the first to set foot in the tomb. A few months after he had visited the king's tomb, the man had accidentally opened a mosquito bite while shaving, ultimately leading to severe pneumonia and infection that would later result in his passing. The next victim had been Sir Bruce Ingham, who'd been a friend of Carter's. Carter had gifted him a preserved hand that wore a bracelet detailing that whoever moved the body would be cursed with fire and water. It was soon after receiving the gift that Ingham's home had faced a disaster, and after he rebuilt it, a devastating flood crumbled it once again. He later got rid of the gift. The next two individuals to meet their demise due to the alleged curse had been Prince Ali Hemal Fahmy Bey and Sir Lee Stack, who had been the governor of Sudan. After a year of visiting the place, both of the individuals were met with an assassination. Obviously, they'd met their demise for political reasons, but perhaps the ghost of King Tut was seeking vengeance on those who disturbed his tomb. The British Prime Minister, Aubrey Herbert, who'd been the half-brother of Lord Carnarvon, was the next to befall the curse. It was alleged that after entering the tomb, the Prime Minister had stated that something dreadful was going to happen to his family, and shortly after that he passed away from the poisoning of vital fluid. It's said that the half-brothers may have both had a naturally weakened immune system, making them predisposed to such issues. Lord Carnarvon's older brother had also met his demise through poisoning, as well as malaria and pneumonia. Strange that each sibling would suddenly be plagued by such problems after having visited the tomb. After the brothers had met their demise, the next to go on had been A.C. Mace, who had taken over for Carter in 1924 up until 1928, during further excavations of King Tut's tomb, where he would make some new discoveries. The longer the man had stayed on the excavation site, the weaker he would become, until 1928, when he finally collapsed and passed away of arsenic poisoning. No one could figure out where the man had been exposed to the arsenic. The final victims of the curse had been both Richard Bethel and his father. Bethel had been Carter's secretary and had been there when the tomb was initially opened. He managed to make it until 1929. After he was found deceased, a few months later, his father was discovered as well. Strangely enough, his apartment had been filled with relics from the site. There have been some strange coincidences throughout history of cities and places around the world being accidentally named the same despite being miles apart, in different countries, or coming into existence at different times. Many have heard of Memphis in Tennessee, but strangely enough, Egypt had a city of the same name. One of them is a music hotspot, whereas the other is an ancient city that had been founded in 3200 BC and later abandoned. Both places have pyramids, but are situated 10,529 miles apart. There's a city in Jamaica called Kingston, which also appears to exist in New York. Kingston, New York is said to date back to 1652, and in 1777, it became the state's first capital city. Kingston, Jamaica was a harbor town that had been founded in 1692, and the largest English-speaking city that it found in the Western Hemisphere outside the United States. Situated on two different continents are Naples, Florida, and Naples, Italy, one of which had been a port city since the 1880s, while the other had been considered a port city since around 326 BC. The two cities are 8,616 miles apart. Cambridge, Massachusetts had been founded under the colonists of a king in 1630, whereas its twin, Cambridge, England, had been founded under a king in 1209, with a distance spanning 5,258 miles. St. Petersburg in Florida and the one in Russia make the list as well, one of which is in the home of glistening waters, while the other holds a rather colorful church. Alexandria, Egypt had been founded in 331 BC, when Alexandria, Virginia, came about in 1749. Both of these are said to be port cities and were once the home to world rulers. There's a 9,176-mile difference between them. When one hears the name Dublin, they're bound to think of Ireland, but Ohio has a city named Dublin as well, and both of these cities offer Celtic treats. The next 20 cities are situated 15,671 miles from one another. Melbourne, Florida and Melbourne, Australia are quite a distance away from one another, and are yet named the same. Lebanon is both a city and a country, and it was found that there are 47 cities within the US that are named Lebanon, none of which were named after the country. Lebanon actually refers to a biblical name. It's certainly a strange coincidence that the founders of each of these places had somehow come up with the same names despite being miles apart and being founded at different times. There are far more cities that make the Twinning Cities list. Some of these names have also been used for various cities all across the globe. There are said to be two versions of the Great Sausage Duel of 1865. It had been 3 years prior to the duel that Otto von Bismarck had been appointed as the minister-president after the passing of King Frederick William IV. After King William, the new patriarch, came into conflict with the Liberal Party of Prussia because he'd wanted to fund the reorganization of the army, and so his son suggested that Bismarck be brought in to handle the debate. He only had to get it past the leader of the party, Rudolf Virchow. When Bismarck had pressed the leader on his denial of reorganizing of the military, his response had been, quote, "If the minister-president has read the report, then I don't know what I shall say of his honesty. The truth is that the reserves in the state treasury are decreasing, that the means of carrying on the government without budget are growing less, and that it sought to restore the deficiency by a loan in order to be able to still sit by warm stoves." And Bismarck could not accept that, and so Virchow was challenged to a duel. In the two stories of the duel, one of them is said to contain Germany's favorite food item. In the first version, Virchow had immediately declined to such a duel, but in the more interesting version, he had agreed, but had posed a less violent term. This had been the fight to the end with a potentially poisoned sausage. There had been one safe sausage and another that was packed with trichinella larvae involved in its preposition. Trichinella larvae are said to cause fatal illness in humans. It refers to a nematode parasite that may occur in pigs, rodents, bears, hyenas, and humans. Virchow suggested more of a Russian roulette-style duel involving the sausages, but it had been as a mere bluff, as he didn't think that Bismarck would agree to it. But he did, in order to maintain his credibility in German politics. But when the duel came about, he cancelled it on the grounds that he'd been the minister-president and getting taken down by a sausage would probably not look the greatest to the public. If one were to ingest the trichinella worm, the first symptoms would begin within 12 hours or 2 days. The migration of the worms in the intestines would cause severe inflammation and pain. In the 5 to 7 days afterward, the host would experience facial edema and fever. Within 10 days, muscular pain would begin, difficulty breathing would occur, the pulse would weaken, and damage to the heart would result. Inevitably, these symptoms would result in heart failure, kidney malfunction, and respiratory problems. Luckily, Bismarck rescinded the duel right before it was set to happen. Catherine I of Russia had been a Russian empress from 1725 to 1727. She was born in April of 1684 and met her demise in 1727 in St. Petersburg, Russia. She'd been a peasant woman of Baltic birth, who would later become the second wife of Peter I the Great, who reigned from 1682 to 1725. Coincidentally, there'd been another Russian ruler named Catherine, who was referred to as Catherine the Great. She had also been born in April, but in a different year, 1729. She had passed away in 1796, also near St. Petersburg, Russia. Catherine the Great had also married someone who was referred to as Peter III. In February of 1725, Catherine I's Peter had passed away, and since he had not named an heir, she was appointed to the throne and proclaimed as the Empress of Russia. But in 1726, she'd created the Supreme Privy Council, where she had named 6 of Peter's advisors as members and transferred control of the government affairs to them, undermining the authority of the Senate. Before her passing, Catherine I had appointed Peter's grandson as the heir, and later her own daughter Elizabeth, who reigned from 1742 to 1762. Catherine the Great had come into power after leading a successful rebellion against Peter III, who'd been the heir to the Russian throne. She had carried out the rebellion against him after he ascended the throne. In this case, both of the Catherines were widowed. Additionally, at this time, Russia was being ruled by the aforementioned Elizabeth, Catherine I, and Peter the Great's daughter. Coincidentally, the second Catherine and the Peter that the first Catherine had married were both referred to as the Great. Both the women had not been originally named Catherine. Catherine I had actually been Marta Skowronska, who had been taken prisoner in 1702 during the Great Northern War, and only after the birth of her first child was she renamed to Catherine, whereas the second empress had been named Sophie, and in 1744 she had arrived in Russia and assumed the title of Grand Duchess Catherine. Catherine I and Peter the Great both had 12 children together, all of whom passed away in childhood except for two, Anna and Elizabeth. Catherine the Great only had 3 children, one of whom passed away in childhood. There are quite a few similarities between the two Catherines that are certainly strange coincidences to have occurred in history at different times. From the names they were given to the names of the people they had married, both of their husbands had passed away, and both of the empresses had met their demise near St. Petersburg. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.